Hi guys, tonight we're standing with you on the edge of the plains, the sky stretched wide and pale, the sun slipping down so fast it feels almost rude. The air already smells thin and sharp like dry grass and distant snow. Your boots crunch softly as you shift your weight, and somewhere behind you a wagon wheel ticks as it cools. This is the moment before the cold really shows its teeth. You pull your coat tighter without thinking because instinct is quicker than reason out here. You probably will not survive this journey if you make too many mistakes, and that thought drifts through your mind as casually as the wind brushing your cheek. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights. You watch the last band of orange sink into the horizon, and the temperature drops with a speed that still surprises historians today. One well-established historical fact is that nighttime temperatures on the Great Plains could fall by 30 degrees or more within a single hour after sunset, especially in early spring and late fall. You feel it happen in stages. First, your fingers stiffen, then your ears ache, then your breath turns visible, little clouds escaping your mouth as if your body is quietly leaking warmth. There are no trees to block the wind. That is the first lesson the plains teach you, and they teach it without mercy. The land rolls gently, almost kindly, but kindness is not the same as protection. The wind slides over the grass and finds every gap in your clothing. You realize quickly that night is not just the absence of light. It is an active force pressing against you, testing seams and buttons and confidence. You help guide the wagon into a loose circle with the others, a habit that feels comforting, even if its real usefulness is still debated. Historians still argue whether circling wagons was primarily defensive practical, or simply a ritual that made people feel less exposed. Tonight it's about blocking the wind. You angle the wooden sides just enough to create a pocket of calmer air, and when you step inside that space, the difference feels dramatic, like someone turned the volume down on the cold. The smells change as night settles. The sun-warmed scent of grass fades, replaced by canvas wood animal hide and the faint sourness of livestock nearby. Oxen shift and snort their breath steaming, and that sound becomes strangely comforting. Sound carries differently in the cold. Every movement seems louder, more deliberate. A dropped tin cup rings out like a bell, and laughter feels brittle, like it could snap if it goes on too long. You probably imagined pioneers heroically striding into the night, fearless and prepared. The reality is quieter and more awkward. People fumble with gloves, argue gently about where to put things, and worry about small details. Did you close the flour barrel properly? Is the water bucket going to freeze solid by morning? These thoughts circle your mind as persistently as the wind circles the camp. A quirky but well-documented tidbit is that some settlers believed sleeping with metal objects like knives or tools near the body could draw out cold and make you chill faster. There is no real evidence for this, but belief shapes behavior. You tuck your knife a little farther away just in case. Out here, superstition and practicality often blur together, especially at night when fear has more room to stretch. As darkness deepens, the sky explodes with stars. Without city lights, the Milky Way spills across the heavens so bright it almost looks textured. You tilt your head back and feel very small, and that feeling is not entirely unpleasant. The cold sharpens everything, even wonder. Your eyelashes feel stiff, and when you blink there is a faint crunch that makes you pause. You did not expect your own face to freeze. You think about sleep, but sleep feels like something that belongs to another life. For now, survival is about preparation. You stomp your feet to keep blood moving, then stop because you remember sweating is dangerous. Moisture steals heat faster than air ever could. That is another mainstream fact that guides your behavior even if you do not know the science behind it yet. Sweat now means shivering later, and shivering means wasted energy. The fire crackles to life, modest and carefully fed. Flames are precious here. Wood is scarce, and everyone knows it. You warm your hands, slowly rotating them like you're roasting invisible marshmallows. The heat feels good, almost too good, and you have to remind yourself not to crowd the flames. Canvas and sparks are not friends. Someone coughs. Someone else hums softly a tune you almost recognize. The sound drifts thin and comforting, and you realize that noise itself is a kind of insulation. Silence lets fear creep closer. Talking pushes it back, even if only a little. You lie down, eventually wrapped in wool and hope, staring up at the stars through a gap in the wagon canvas. The ground is already hardening beneath you. You can feel the cold pressing up through layers of cloth, slow and patient. This is only the first night, you remind yourself. The plains are just beginning to show you what they are capable of. Your breathing slows despite everything. The fire pops, an ox shifts, the wind sighs. Cold does not rush you, it waits. And as sleep finally edges closer, you understand that surviving the night will be a skill you learn again and again, each time slightly different, each time slightly harder. Morning feels like a rumour rather than a promise. You wake in fragments, drifting in and out, aware first of the cold and only later of yourself. Your nose is numb, your breath shallow until you force it deeper. When you finally sit up, the wagon beside you looks transformed. In daylight it was just wood and iron. Now in the dim pre-dawn blue it feels like a shelter you've already grown attached to. Night teaches attachment quickly. As darkness thickens again the following evening, you begin to understand how wagons are more than vehicles. They are walls, windbreaks, storage units, and psychological anchors all at once. A well-known historical fact is that most prairie wagons were built with thin wooden sides and canvas tops designed for hauling, not insulation. Yet settlers leaned on them heavily at night, trusting structure for open exposure. You pull the wagon into position with the other's muscles already aching from the day. The routine is becoming familiar, wheels angled slightly into the wind, tongues secured, canvas checked for tears. Every small task feels heavier when you know cold is waiting for you the moment the sun disappears. The wagon creaks softly as it settles, sounding almost like a tired animal lowering itself to rest. You crawl partly inside, partly beneath the wagon testing spaces. Underneath is darker, quieter, and smells strongly of earth and grease. The ground radiates cold, but the wagon blocks the wind. Inside the canvas flutters and snaps, a constant reminder that fabric is not the same as a wall. You weigh your options slowly because rushing leads to mistakes. Historians still debate whether sleeping inside wagons actually provided significant warmth or simply reduced wind chill, but for you, even reduced wind feels like luxury. The sounds of camp change when people retreat toward their wagons. Voices drop. Movements become careful. Someone accidentally bumps a wheel, and the dull thud echoes farther than expected. Sound travels cleanly in cold air, as if the night is listening closely. You become aware of every noise you make suddenly plight to the darkness. A quirky detail that turns up in diary entries is that some settlers hung spare blankets or clothing along the inside of the wagon canvas at night, creating a makeshift insulated wall. You try this yourself, draping a coat and an old quilt where the wind seems most eager to sneak in. It looks messy and improvised, but when you press your hand against it, the air feels less biting. It is not warmth exactly, more like a pause in the cold. You slide into your bedroll, the fabric stiff from yesterday's frost. The wagon floor is unforgiving. Every board presses into your hip and shoulder, and you shift repeatedly, searching for a position that does not hurt. Comfort is a negotiation now, not a given. You remind yourself that pain means you're alive and aware, which feels important when the cold tries to lull you into stillness. The smell inside the wagon is intimate. Wool, leather, damp wood, a hint of flour dust. It is the smell of everything you own compressed into one space. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the canvas and making the wagon shudder. You imagine it as a ship at sea and the plains as a frozen ocean. It is a silly thought, but it calms you. Someone nearby whispers a prayer. Someone else sighs heavily, the sound long and tired. You're not alone in this struggle, even if it feels solitary. Shared hardship has a way of linking people quietly without speeches or handshakes. You think about how modern houses are designed to keep weather out completely, and the thought feels almost unbelievable. As the night deepens, you become aware of heat patterns. Your body warms the small pocket of air around you, and every movement disrupts it. When you shift, cold rushes in to replace what you had carefully built. You learn to move slowly, deliberately, as if you're stacking invisible bricks of warmth. This kind of learning does not come from books, it comes from shivering. A mainstream fact that underpins all of this is that wind chill, not just temperature, is the primary danger on the plains at night. Even relatively mild temperatures can become lethal when wind strips heat from the body. You do not know the term wind chill, but you know its effect intimately. You feel it gnawing at your ankles and wrists, hunting for skin. There is debate among scholars about whether settlers exaggerated nighttime cold in their journals to emphasize hardship, or whether modern readers underestimate how brutal these conditions truly were. Lying here listening to the canvas snap and the wagon groan, you suspect the truth leans toward understatement. Cold has a way of rewriting memory, sharpening it. You drift again, half asleep, half alert. Dreams come in pieces. You dream of walls of thick stone and glowing hearths. You wake with a start when a gust slams into the wagon, and your heart races before you calm it down. Panic burns energy you cannot spare. You breathe slowly, counting, listening to the rhythm of the wind. Sometime in the night, frost forms on the inside of the canvas. You notice it when your fingers brush something gritty and cold. Ice crystals sparkle faintly in the starlight, filtering through delicate and beautiful. It feels unfair that something so pretty can mean so much danger. Moisture from your breath has frozen inches from your face, a reminder of how close freezing truly is. You tuck your chin down, pulling fabric closer. The wagon holds, the wind passes, time stretches. Night does not feel like hours anymore. It feels like endurance measured in breaths. And when your thoughts finally soften, slipping towards sleep again, you understand that the wagon is not a perfect shelter. It is simply better than nothing, and on the plains at night, better than nothing is often enough. You wake before the sun again, stiff and slow, already thinking about the next night even as you pack. Cold teaches you to plan ahead. As the day unfolds and the sun briefly warms your back, you notice how carefully everyone handles clothing. Nothing is casual anymore. Every layer has a purpose. Every button matters. When evening approaches, you prepare yourself like someone getting ready for a quiet battle. A well-established historical fact is that most settlers relied heavily on wool for cold weather, because wool retains warmth even when damp. You pull on a wool shirt that scratches your skin in a way you have come to accept. It smells faintly of smoke and animal oil, not unpleasant, just honest. Over it goes another layer, then another. You're building a system, not an outfit. The wind rises as the sun lowers and you turn your back to it, slipping into a heavier coat. The trick is not to dress too warmly too soon. You remember yesterday's sweat, how it cooled you later. Moisture is the enemy that does not announce itself. Historians still debate how much settlers understood about moisture management versus learning through painful experience, but you suspect knowledge came mostly from the latter. Your hands fumble with gloves that are too thin and already worn. You flex your fingers trying to keep blood moving. Fingers go first. Toes soon follow. You stuff extra cloth into your boots, an improvised solution that feels clever and clumsy at the same time. A quirky detail noted in several trail accounts is that people sometimes line their boots with newspaper when available, using trapped air as insulation. You do not have newspaper, but the idea lingers as you pack grass and spare fabric instead. The camp smells different at night when everyone is bundled up. Wool dominates, heavy and warm. There is also the sharp tang of cold metal, the way iron smells when the air is dry and freezing. You breathe carefully through your nose, the air stinging slightly as it enters your lungs. Each breath feels like a small act of courage. As you settle near the wagon, you notice how clothing changes the way you move. Layers restrict you, slow you down. Bending feels deliberate. Sitting feels like an event. You become aware of your body as a collection of heat sources you're trying to protect. Your core matters more than your limbs, and you hunch slightly instinctively guarding it. Someone nearby jokes softly about wearing every piece of clothing they own at once. The humour is thin but welcome. Laughter warms more than people admit. You smile, feeling the fabric pull at your cheeks. Your face is exposed and you consider wrapping it, but breathing through cloth feels damp and dangerous. You compromise, pulling your collar higher. There is an old belief passed quietly among travellers that tighter clothing keeps you warmer. Tonight you realise how wrong that feels. Compression pushes out the insulating air your layers are meant to trap. You loosen a belt, ease a sleeve, and immediately feel a subtle improvement. These are lessons learned inch by inch. The wind slides over you again, testing. You turn sideways, presenting less surface. This small adjustment feels like a victory. Historians still argue whether settlers consciously adapted posture and movement to conserve heat, or whether it was all instinct. Out here the distinction hardly matters. You do what works and remember it. You sit near the fire long enough to take the edge off, but not long enough to sweat. The heat feels almost intoxicating, and you have to pull yourself away. A mainstream fact often overlooked is that overheating before sleep in cold conditions can increase the risk of hypothermia later. Your body is not a battery. It cannot store excess heat efficiently. You keep this in mind as you move toward your bedroll. The sounds of the night return familiar now. Canvas flaps, an animal snorts, the fire crackles and settles. You lie down slowly, arranging layers so they do not bunch or press too tightly. You tuck fabric round your shoulders, then stop yourself from pulling it too snug. Balance is everything. As you lie there, you notice how your breathing warms the air just in front of your face. It is a fragile bubble. You try not to disturb it. Your thoughts slow, focusing on small sensations, the weight of the wool, the faint itch on your wrist, the steady rhythm of your heart. There is debate among modern scholars about how much cold tolerance varied among individuals on the trail, influenced by body type, age, and prior exposure. Tonight it feels intensely personal. You're aware of every place where cold presses hardest. Ankles, neck, lower back. You adjust again, making tiny corrections. A memory surfaces of life before this, of heated rooms and easy comfort. The memory feels distant, like it belongs to someone else. Out here, clothing is not fashion or identity. It is infrastructure. It is architecture you carry on your body. Sleep comes unevenly, arriving and retreating. When you wake briefly, you do not panic. You have learned that waking means you are still fighting. You flex your toes, clench your hands inside your sleeves, then let yourself drift again. The cold remains patient and unyielding, but tonight, you have met it with preparation instead of surprise, and that makes all the difference. By the time the sun begins to slide down again, you already feel a quiet tension building in your shoulders. Evening means fire. Fire means warmth, safety, and the possibility of disaster, all wrapped into one flickering thing. Out here, heat does not come freely. It has to be hunted, bargained for, and guarded carefully. You look across the plains and notice again how empty they feel. During the day, the openness feels expansive. At night, it feels stingy. One widely noted reality of the plains is the near total absence of trees across long stretches, especially in central regions. Wagon trains often crossed hundreds of miles where wood was scarce or non-existent. You see the truth of that now as you scan the horizon, your eyes instinctively searching for anything that might burn. The fire tonight is small, built low to the ground, sheltered as best as possible behind a wagon wheel and a pile of gear. Flames lit carefully at their fuel, never roaring. A loud fire wastes heat and draws wind. You kneel close enough to feel warmth on your palms, but not so close that sparks threaten your sleeves. You have already learned that excitement around a fire fades quickly once night deepens. Fuel becomes the quiet obsession of camp. During the day, people keep an eye out constantly. A fallen branch here, a bit of driftwood near a dry creek bed there. Everything burnable is weighed mentally against the effort of carrying it. Contemporary journals show that settlers often argued more fiercely over firewood than over food, especially as nights grew colder. You understand why. You can go hungry and still function. Cold shuts you down fast. As darkness settles, someone feeds the fire with the last decent piece of wood you have. It crackles brightly for a moment, sending sparks upward like brief stars. Then it settles again lower and dimmer. You feel a pang of anxiety watching it shrink. The night is long. You wonder if this will be enough. There is a strange ritual to fire tending. Too much fuel at once wastes it. Too little lets the flames die. You poke gently, adjust airflow, and learn to read the colour of embers. Red means steady. Dull orange means trouble. These lessons come without instruction. You absorb them by watching, by feeling your hands cool too quickly when you misjudge. An odd workaround shows up in several personal letters from the trail. Some groups mix small amounts of animal fat into their fires to extend burning time when wood was scarce. It produced a thick smell and uneven heat, but it worked. You wrinkle your nose at the idea, but keep it filed away in your mind. Survival expands your definition of acceptable solutions. The smell of the fire clings to everything. Hair, wool, canvas. It becomes a comfort of its own. Smoke stings your eyes, but you blink through it, preferring irritation to cold. The sound of burning becomes the background music of the night, a soft crackle that reassures you the world has not completely frozen. As the hours pass, the fire demands constant attention. Someone always stays half awake to tend it, feeding small bits, adjusting stones, shielding it from gusts. There is debate among researchers about whether wagon trains formally assigned fire watchers, or if the role rotated informally. From where you sit, it feels organic. Whoever wakes up first stirs the embers. Whoever feels the cold creeping closest reaches for fuel. You notice how fire changes the social shape of the group. People gather near it, then drift away as sleep pulls them. Conversations start and fade. Faces glow briefly, then disappear into shadow. The circle tightens and loosens like breathing. Firelight flattens features, making everyone look older and more tired. You warm your hands, then your feet lifting one boot at a time toward the heat. The soles steam faintly. You pull them back quickly, remembering how moisture can betray you later. Balance again. Everything is balance. Warm enough not too warm, close enough not too close. A well-documented danger on the trail was fire itself. Canvas ignites fast. Sparks travel unpredictably in wind. More than one camp was lost to nighttime fire accidents that started with a single careless movement. You stay alert even as your eyelids grow heavy. Relaxation is earned slowly here and never completely. As the fire dwindles, its warmth no longer reaches your back. You feel cold reclaiming territory inch by inch. You add one last small piece of fuel and watch it catch, knowing it may be the final addition until morning. There is a quiet sadness in that realization. Fire feels like companionship when everything else sleeps. Eventually you retreat to your bedroll, carrying the memory of warmth with you. The fire remains in your peripheral awareness, aglow behind closed eyes. You listen for its crackle, using sound to judge whether it still lives. When the crackle fades to silence, you feel a small tightening in your chest, then force yourself to breathe slowly. The night deepens. Frost forms again, glittering faintly in the fire's dying light. The air smells sharper, without smoke cleaner but crueler. You tuck your hands under your arms, conserving heat. Your body curls inward, instinctively reducing surface area. This posture is ancient, older than wagons and trails. There is still no agreement among historians on how often fires truly made the difference between life and death on cold nights versus simply improving morale. Lying here, you suspect the answer is both. Warmth keeps muscles working. Comfort keeps the mind steady. Without either, mistakes multiply. As sleep finally settles over you, the fire is gone, but its lesson remains. Heat is temporary. Cold is patient. Tomorrow you will search again for fuel, knowing that every scrap you find buys you another fragile pocket of warmth against the endless night. By now you have learned to recognize a certain look that passes between people as evening approaches. It is not panic, it is calculation. Eyes scan the ground almost automatically, searching for anything that might burn. Wood is rare, and tonight you already know there will not be enough. The plains do not offer apologies. As the fire dwindles earlier than you hoped, someone clears their throat and mentions the alternative everyone has been quietly avoiding: dried buffalo dung. You pause, letting the idea settle. The smell, the thought, the awkwardness of it. And yet records from the mid-19th century plainly show that buffalo chips were one of the most common fuel sources used by settlers crossing treeless regions. You're not desperate. You are practical. You head out with the others, lantern light bobbing as you walk. The ground crunches faintly beneath your boots, frost stiffening the grass. The chips lie scattered, pale and flat, almost blending into the earth. They're lighter than you expect when you pick them up dry and fibrous. There is a faint, earthy smell, not as unpleasant as you imagined. You stack them, carefully treating them with the same respect you once reserved for firewood. A lesser-known detail that appears in a handful of trail diaries is that experienced travellers could judge the age of buffalo chips by colour and texture. Older sun-bleached pieces burned cleaner and hotter, while fresher ones smouldered and smoked. You find yourself examining each piece, turning it in your hands like a strange form of currency. Knowledge changes everything. Back at camp, the fire is rebuilt slowly. The first chip catches, then another. The flame looks different now, lower, broader. It does not crackle the way wood does. Instead, it glows and breathes, releasing steady heat. The smell is distinct, sharp at first, then surprisingly mild. You brace yourself for disgust, then feel only relief as warmth reaches your knees. There is still disagreement among historians about how quickly settlers accepted buffalo chips as fuel versus resisting out of cultural discomfort. Watching the fire tonight, you suspect acceptance came swiftly. Cold erodes pride efficiently. Survival has a way of simplifying values. You sit closer than usual, drawn in by the unfamiliar warmth. The heat is even reliable. It does not flare and fade like wood. Someone remarks quietly that it burns longer. Someone else nods. No one jokes. Respect has replaced hesitation. You realize that this knowledge likely came from indigenous peoples who had lived on the plains for generations, though not everyone here acknowledges that debt openly. An unusual belief circulated among some travellers that buffalo chip fires were safer to sleep near because they produced fewer sparks. There is some truth to that. You notice the absence of flying embers and your shoulders relax slightly. Canvas feels less threatened. Tonight the danger shifts from sudden flame to slow smoke. As the fire settles into a steady glow, the camp grows calmer. The wind still moves across the plains, but the heat holds its ground. You warm your hands, then your feet, then your back. The smell lingers on your clothes, earthy and persistent. It is not pleasant, but it is not offensive either. Mostly it smells like not freezing. You listen to the fire as much as you watch it. There is a soft hiss now, and then a gentle collapse as a chip turns to ash. The sound is hypnotic. Your breathing slows without effort. Warmth does that. It loosens muscles you did not realize were clenched. A documented reality of these fires is that they required careful airflow to burn well. Too tightly packed and they smothered. Too loose and they cooled too quickly. You adjust the arrangement with a stick, learning the balance through trial. The fire responds immediately, glowing brighter. You feel a small surge of satisfaction. Control is comforting. As night deepens, you retreat again to your bedroll, carrying heat with you like a borrowed gift. The fire remains steady longer than usual, and you fall asleep more easily. When you wake briefly, you're surprised to see it still glowing. The night feels less hostile, more manageable. There are ongoing debates among scholars about whether reliance on buffalo chips significantly altered migration routes or camp locations. From where you lie, that question feels distant. What matters is that tonight warmth did not vanish too quickly. Tonight the plains offered something usable. In the quiet hours before dawn, ash settles softly over the fire pit. The smell fades into the background, becoming just another layer of camp life. You breathe evenly, wrapped in wool and smoke and relief. Cold still waits beyond the firelight, patient as ever. But for now, you have learned another way to push it back. Night after night, you begin to notice how bodies naturally drift closer together once the fire fades. No one announces it. No one plans it. It just happens slow and instinctive, like animals seeking shelter. Warmth is no longer something you find alone. It is something you share. As the temperature drops, you sit shoulder to shoulder with others' backs nearly touching, forming a loose cluster that blocks the wind. A well-recorded reality of overland travel is that people often slept in close proximity, during extreme cold, even when social norms would normally discourage it. Survival had a way of softening boundaries. Tonight it softens yours. You feel the heat of another body through layers of wool, subtle but unmistakable. It is not comfort in the modern sense. It is practical, almost mechanical. Heat transfers. You shift slightly, careful not to press too close. Everyone is aware of everyone else. The balance between warmth and personal space is delicate. There is an awkwardness to it at first. Elbows bump. Someone's boot presses into your calf. You adjust, murmuring apologies that feel unnecessary. No one takes offense. Everyone understands the equation. Warmth now, dignity later. The cold does not care about modesty. A curious detail appears in a few first-hand accounts of the trail. Some groups intentionally paired people at night based on size or perceived body heat, believing larger individuals radiated more warmth. Whether this was truly effective is unclear, but the belief shaped behavior. You find yourself seated next to someone broad-shouldered, and you do not question how that happened. As the hours pass, you become more aware of shared risks. Illness travels easily when people are close. Coughs echo more loudly in the quiet night. A sniffle draws attention. You listen carefully to the breathing around you, unconsciously gauging danger. There is no real way to avoid this risk. Distance means cold. Closeness means sickness. You choose warmth. Researchers continue to debate how often disease spread within wagon trains due to nighttime crowding versus daytime interactions. From your perspective, the night feels more intimate, more vulnerable. Breath mingles, heat mixes. You pull your scarf up slightly, then lower it again to avoid dampness. Every decision feels weighted. The smells of shared warmth are unavoidable. Wool leather, smoke, and human bodies blend into a thick, heavy scent. It is not pleasant, but it is reassuring in its own way. It smells like life, stubborn and persistent. You associate it with not being alone in the dark. As sleep approaches, someone shifts and accidentally presses too close. For a moment, irritation flares. Then a gust of wind cuts through the camp and the irritation disappears. Perspective adjusts quickly out here. You tuck your hands between your knees, conserving heat, and lean slightly into the shared warmth. A well-known challenge of this arrangement is restlessness. People move in their sleep. They twitch, roll, sigh. Each movement ripples through this cluster, disturbing others. You wake briefly when someone shifts, then settle again. Waking becomes less alarming. You trust that the group will hold. There is an unspoken etiquette that develops. No sudden movements. No unnecessary adjustments. If you must shift, you do it slowly, giving others time to adapt. This quiet cooperation feels almost graceful. In the dark, without seeing faces clearly, you sense people more by presence than identity. Some travellers believed that shared sleeping helped morale as much as warmth. The human mind calms when it knows it is not alone. You feel that now as your breathing syncs unconsciously with those around you, fear retreats, replaced by a dull, steady tiredness. Not everyone adapts easily. Someone mutters in their sleep. Someone else pulls away slightly, seeking solitude, even at the cost of warmth. There is no judgment. Each body negotiates with the cold differently. You respect that even as you choose closeness for yourself. Modern historians have not reached agreement on whether communal sleeping significantly reduced nighttime deaths from exposure or simply made nights more bearable. Lying here feeling heat soak slowly into your side, you suspect both are true. Comfort keeps you still. Stillness conserves energy. Energy keeps you alive. As the night stretches on, the cluster loosens slightly. Bodies cool. Space reappears. You remain aware of the cold pressing in again, testing gaps. You tuck your chin down, drawing your shoulders inward. The shared warmth fades but does not vanish entirely. It lingers like an echo. Eventually sleep takes you more fully. Dreams are shallow, interrupted by sensation rather than thought. When you wake briefly before dawn, you realize you're still warm enough. Not comfortable, not cozy, but alive, breathing, present. And on the plains at night, that is more than enough. You lie awake longer than you expect, not because of fear, but because the night has its own voice here. Without walls, without insulation, every sound arrives unfiltered. The plains do not hush themselves for sleep. They whisper, creak, sigh, and sometimes howl. The wind moves constantly, never settling. It slides through grass like water, producing a low, restless rustle that rises and falls. Period journals make it clear that many travellers found prairie sounds more unsettling at night than forests or mountains. There is no echo to place them, no clear source. Sounds simply exist everywhere at once. You turn your head slightly ear-angled toward the open darkness. Somewhere in the distance an animal calls. The sound is thin and wavering, then answered by another farther away. Coyotes, most likely. You've heard them before, but at night, wrapped in cold, the sound lands differently. It stretches time, making distances feel uncertain. The wagons respond to the cold too. Wood contracts as temperatures fall, producing sharp pops and long groans. At first you mistake the sound for footsteps and feel your heart quicken. Then you recognize it, and the tension drains away. The wagon is not breaking, it is simply adjusting to the night. A curious habit noted in several accounts involves settlers intentionally making small familiar noises before sleeping. A cough, a soft hum, the tapping of a boot heel. These sounds grounded people, reminding them they were not alone. You find yourself clearing your throat quietly, then feel faintly foolish, then comforted. The animals add their own layer. Oxen shuffle, stamping, occasionally breath steaming in the cold. A horse snorts sharply, then settles again. These sounds feel solid and reassuring. As long as the animals are calm, the night feels manageable. When they startle, everyone notices. There is no firm agreement among historians on how often nighttime sounds caused false alarms or panic among wagon trains. Some diaries describe men leaping up at imagined threats, weapons in hand, only to discover wind or wildlife. Others barely mention fear at all. Listening, now you understand how the same sound could mean different things depending on exhaustion and imagination. The fire has faded to embers, and without its crackle the world feels larger. Silence is never complete. Even in still moments the air hums faintly. You hear your own breathing more clearly, the slow rhythm rising and falling. Each breath fogs the air briefly, then disappears. You notice how cold sharpens hearing. Small noises feel amplified. Fabric brushing against skin sounds loud. A nearby sleeper shifts and the rustle of wool feels startling. You remind yourself to relax, unclenching your jaw, lowering your shoulders. Tension wastes energy. One oddly specific practice gets mentioned more than once in trail writings. Some settlers slept with a stick or tool laid across their chest, believing the familiar weight and shape would reassure them if they woke suddenly. You do not adopt the habit, but you understand the logic. Comfort can be physical as much as emotional. The wind picks up again, stronger now, pushing against the wagons. Canvas snaps sharply, then settles into a steady flap. You imagine the cold pressing against the thin barrier, testing it. The wagon holds, but you remain aware of its limits. Canvas is a suggestion, not a shield. Opinions remain divided among modern researchers about whether settlers truly slept deeply on the plains or simply drifted in shallow rest between disturbances. Tonight it feels like the latter. Sleep comes in waves. You float for a while, then surface again at the slightest change in sound. A distant howl stretches longer this time, rising and falling. It does not sound close, but distance is hard to judge in the dark. You remind yourself that predators rarely approach large groups of humans. This knowledge helps, but it does not silence instinct completely. Your body remains alert even as your mind tries to rest. As the hours pass, the sounds blend together, becoming less distinct. Windbreath fabric animals. They merge into a low, constant presence. You stop analyzing each one. Acceptance replaces vigilance. This is the night. This is its language. Just before sleep takes you more fully, a sudden quiet settles. The wind pauses, the animals still. For a moment the plains feel as if they are holding their breath. You do the same unconsciously. Then the wind returns gentler now, and you release the breath you didn't realize you were holding. You turn slightly, finding a more comfortable position, and let the sounds wash over you without interpretation. The night continues speaking, but you no longer feel the need to answer. Wrapped in cold, surrounded by quiet life, you drift, knowing that listening itself has become part of survival. You become acutely aware of who sleeps closest to the center of the group and who edges toward the outside. At night, the cold redraws social maps. Children and elders are quietly shifted inward, closer to fire remnants and shared warmth. No announcements are made. It happens through small gestures, a hand guiding a shoulder, a bedroll nudged closer. Protection here is practical, not sentimental. Trail records consistently show that children were among the most vulnerable to nighttime cold on the plains. Their smaller bodies lost heat faster, and they often lack the instinct to manage layers properly. You watch an adult gently adjust a child's blanket, tucking it under small shoulders with care that feels almost ceremonial. That motion carries weight. It says this matters. Older travelers face a different set of challenges. Stiff joints ache more fiercely in the cold. Circulation slows. Rising quickly becomes risky. You notice how elders move cautiously as night falls, conserving energy, choosing positions that require minimal adjustment. Someone offers an extra layer without comment. Pride softens when the alternative is pain. A curious workaround appears in scattered accounts from the trail. Some families place children between adults at night, using bodies as living insulation. It was not always comfortable, but it was effective. You see this arrangement now, a small shape nestle between two larger ones, breathing steady. The sight brings a quiet sense of order to the chaos. There is no firm agreement among historians on how often these protective arrangements truly prevented deaths from exposure versus simply improving comfort. The evidence is fragmented, drawn from journals that often focused more on movement than rest. Still, the repetition of these practices across regions suggests they mattered. You trust the instinct behind them. The sounds of children sleeping differ from adults. Their breathing is lighter, quicker. Occasionally one whimpers softly, caught in a dream, shaped by cold and unfamiliarity. A hand reaches out, instinctively smoothing hair, offering reassurance without waking them. Touch becomes communication when words would break the fragile calm. You think about how responsibility feels heavier at night. During the day, danger comes from terrain, weather, exhaustion. At night it feels closer, more intimate. Cold does not announce itself loudly. It creeps. Watching over someone else sharpens your awareness. You listen not just for wind or animals, but for changes in breathing. Survivor accounts repeatedly mention that illness often revealed itself first at night. A cough that worsened after dark. A fever that flared when the body tried to rest. You notice someone shifting restlessly nearby, breathing uneven. There is concern but no panic. Panic wastes energy. Observation does not. An unusual belief held by some travellers was that sleeping children should never be placed directly on the ground, even with bedding. They believed the earth pulled heat away more aggressively from the young. While the science behind this was not understood at the time, the practice often proved wise. You help slide a bedroll onto a wagon floor instead, feeling the subtle difference immediately. The night stretches on and fatigue deepens. Adults wake more often, checking blankets, adjusting positions. Children remain mostly still trusting. That trust feels heavy. You're careful not to disturb it. Every movement is slow, deliberate, respectful of sleep's fragility. Evidence points in multiple directions when it comes to how families coped emotionally with these nights. Some journals describe closeness and bonding. Others hint at strain and fear. Watching the quiet choreography around you, you sense both. Love and exhaustion share the same space easily. As the temperature drops further, you notice elders pulling hands into sleeves curling inward. Someone offers warm food saved from earlier, a small portion passed carefully. Calories matter more now than etiquette. The act is accepted with a nod, not words. You settle again, aware of the weight of bodies nearby, the shared heat rising slowly. The presence of children and elders changes the atmosphere. Movements soften. Voices lower even more. The night feels guarded, watched. Eventually the group stills. Breathing evens out. The cold presses close, but it does not reach everyone equally. The centre holds. You lie there aware that survival on the plains is not only about individual toughness. It is about arrangement, attention, and quiet care after dark. The night passes not because it is kind, but because people stay awake just enough to see it through. By the time night settles in again, your thoughts turn toward food with a seriousness that surprises you. Hunger feels different in the cold. It is sharper, more urgent, as if your body understands that fuel is not just about strength, but about heat. Dinner is no longer simply the end of the day. It is preparation. You sit near the fire, cradling a tin cup, steam curling upward in thin ribbons. One recurring detail from the era is how often settlers timed their largest meal just before nightfall. Heavier food meant more calories working through the body while people slept. You feel that truth warming you from the inside as you sip slowly. The meal is simple. Salted meat beans, maybe a bit of bread if supplies allow. Fat matters more than flavour now. Grease coats your lips and you do not bother wiping it away. Your body needs it. Energy burned during the night must be replaced somehow, and this is the only way available. A curious workaround shows up in scattered accounts of the trail. Some travellers saved a small portion of food specifically to eat if they woke shivering during the night. The act of digestion, they believed, could help restart warmth. Whether this was scientifically sound or not, the habit appears often enough to suggest it offered real comfort. You tuck a small piece of food within reach just in case. As you eat, the firelight flickers across faces. Cheeks look fuller, eyes a little brighter. Food lifts morale as much as it feeds the body. Conversation picks up briefly, then fades again as plates empty. There is a quiet satisfaction in shared eating, a sense of readiness settling over the group. Survivor accounts repeatedly mention that going to bed hungry on the plains was a mistake people rarely made twice. Cold exposes weakness quickly. You chew slowly, making the meal last, letting warmth spread. Your stomach feels heavy, but you welcome the sensation. Weight feels protective. There is no firm agreement among historians on how well settlers understood the connection between calories and nighttime warmth. Some argue it was instinctive, others suggest it was learned painfully through experience. Sitting here, you suspect it did not matter. The body teaches its own lessons, and hunger at night is persuasive. You finish eating and resist the urge to stretch too much. Movement releases heat. Instead, you remain still for a moment, savouring the internal warmth. The contrast between inside and outside feels stark. Cold presses at your skin, but your core holds steady. An oddly specific practice mentioned in a few journals involves drinking warm liquids before sleep, even when water was scarce. Coffee broth, or simply hot water. The warmth was brief but comforting. You take another sip from your cup, then set it aside carefully, not wanting to spill a single drop. As night deepens, digestion becomes a quiet ally. You feel it working, a low, steady process that keeps your body busy. Your breathing slows, muscles relax. Food has done its job. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. You settle into your bedroll, aware that hunger will return by morning. For now, your body is occupied generating heat in its own small way. The fire fades, the wind rises, but inside something holds. Evidence remains mixed on whether late-night eating significantly reduced cases of hypothermia. What is clear is that it made the long hours easier to endure. Comfort matters. Endurance is not just physical. It is mental, emotional, and deeply human. As sleep pulls you under the taste of salt and fat lingers faintly, your stomach feels warm and full. The cold does not vanish, but it no longer feels unbeatable. Tonight, food stands between you and the dark, doing quiet work while you rest. The sky changes without warning. One moment it is clear and sharp with stars, the next it feels lower, heavier, as if something unseen has leaned over the plains. You notice it first in the wind. It shifts direction, then speed, then temperature, arriving colder and wetter all at once. Your skin tightens in response. Something is coming. Snowstorms on the plains rarely announce themselves politely. You have learned that already. During the day, clouds can build, slowly giving time to prepare. At night, storms seem to arrive, already formed, carried in on fast-moving wind. Fine flakes begin to sting your face, barely visible but instantly chilling. You turn your head and squint, heart picking up pace. You pull your collar higher and glance toward the wagons. Others are moving too quietly but quickly. No one shouts. Sound would scatter in the wind anyway. Hands work by memory now. Canvas is checked. Ties are tightened. Anything loose becomes a problem once snow starts to stick. You feel the first real fear of the journey settle in your chest. Cold you understand. Wind you can work with. Snow changes everything. It dampens clothing, blinds vision, erases landmarks. Night magnifies all of it. You realize how fragile your routines are when conditions shift suddenly. The flakes thicken, swirling sideways rather than falling. They hiss as they strike canvas and wool. The fire, already weak, sputters and dims. Someone shields it with their body, but the effort feels symbolic more than effective. Snow melts into the embers, releasing brief steam, then silence. Darkness closes in tighter without the glow. You retreat toward the wagon, brushing snow from your sleeves. It sticks anyway, melting into damp patches that you know will freeze soon. You force yourself to move steadily, not quickly. Panic leads to sweat. Sweat leads to cold that does not forgive. Inside the wagon shelter, the sound changes. Wind howls more clearly now, pressing against wood and canvas with a steady force. Snow rattles against the sides like dry grain. You crouch low, pulling fabric tighter around your legs, trying to protect every inch of exposed skin. Somewhere nearby, a child begins to cry, the sound thin and frightened. It cuts through the storm sharply. An adult soothes them quickly, murmuring low words, pulling them closer. Fear spreads easily in weather like this. Calm has to be defended. You notice how quickly the ground disappears. What was grass and dirt an hour ago is now a smooth, pale surface reflecting faint starlight. Depth becomes impossible to judge. Even stepping outside the wagon circle feels risky now. Snow hides holes, frozen ruts, anything that could send you sprawling. You realize how little control you have over nights like this. Planning only goes so far. The storm does not care how careful you have been. It does not care how tired you are. It simply arrives and demands adjustment. People reposition themselves instinctively, turning backs to the wind, forming tighter clusters. Someone stuffs spare cloth into a gap where canvas flaps too freely. Another wedges a box against a wheel to stop movement. Every small action feels urgent and necessary. There's a belief among some travellers that snowstorms are warmer than clear nights. You feel the truth of that now. The air is still brutally cold, but not quite as biting as before. The wind, however, makes up the difference. It pulls heat relentlessly from exposed skin, finding weaknesses you did not know you had. You press your gloved hands together and tuck them under your arms. Snow melts against your coat, soaking the fabric. You grit your teeth, knowing the dampness will turn against you later. There is no avoiding it completely. You can only manage the damage. Sleep feels impossible now. Every sense is engaged. You listen to the storm's rhythm, learning it the way you learned the wind. Gusts come in waves, lulls follow. You use the quieter moments to shift, to adjust, to breathe more deeply. There is uncertainty among modern researchers about how often sudden nighttime storms cause deaths, directly versus contributing to exhaustion that proved fatal later. From where you sit, the distinction feels academic. The storm is here now. It demands energy you would rather save. Hours stretch. Snow piles against the windward side of the wagons, building a low wall. In a strange way, this helps. The drift blocks some of the wind, creating a pocket of relative calm. You had not planned for this, but you accept the advantage. Your eyelashes grow heavy with frost. When you blink, they stick briefly, then pull free. The sensation startles you, then becomes familiar. You breathe through your nose, carefully warming the air before it reaches your lungs. Each breath feels measured. At some point, fatigue pushes harder than fear. Your body begins to shut down non-essential alertness. You fight it briefly, then give in just enough to rest. Not sleep exactly. Something between. Your thoughts blur. The storm continues whether you watch it or not. When you wake again, the wind has softened. Snow still falls, but more gently now, drifting straight down. The world feels muffled, wrapped. Sound does not travel far through snow. Even the storm seems quieter, as if tired of its own violence. You remain still, letting the cold settle evenly rather than shock your system. Movement now would feel too loud, too abrupt. You wait for dawn without thinking about it directly. Waiting feels safer than hoping. The storm has rewritten the landscape. By morning, everything will look different. Paths erased, tracks gone, familiar shapes softened. You will have to relearn the ground before moving on. For now, you stay where you are wrapped in damp wool, and patience listening to snowfall in the dark. The night has tested you in a new way, and you are still here. Cold, tired, alert, still breathing. That will have to be enough until light returns. Morning leaves behind a different kind of exhaustion. The storm has passed, but its memory lingers in your muscles and bones. As evening approaches again, you find yourself thinking less about weather, and more about where exactly your body will lie for the next long stretch of dark. Sleep is no longer an abstract idea. It is a practical problem that needs solving. You look at the options with a tired, calculating eye. The ground is hard, frozen solid beneath a thin crust of snow. Lying directly on it feels like surrendering heat immediately. Many travellers learn this quickly. Even a thick bedroll loses effectiveness when compressed against frozen earth. You kneel and press a palm down, pulling it back quickly as cold seeps in. The wagon floor offers a different challenge. Wood blocks the wind and lifts you slightly off the ground, but it is unforgiving. Boards press into hips and shoulders, and every movement echoes faintly. Still you remember nights when that hard surface felt like mercy compared to open ground. Elevation matters more than comfort when temperatures drop. Some people choose to sleep beneath the wagon instead. The space is tight and smells of grease and damp earth, but it blocks wind effectively. You crawl partway under and pause listening. It feels sheltered, enclosed, almost womb-like. Snow still clings to the wheels, above you creaking softly as it settles. You weigh the choice carefully. Beneath the wagon means limited movement and little room to adjust. Inside means more space but more exposure to drafts. The ground means simplicity and suffering. You sigh quietly, aware that no option is ideal. Nights on the plains are about choosing the least harmful discomfort. You settle inside the wagon tonight, arranging your bedroll carefully. You layer extra cloth beneath you, not over you. This detail matters. Insulation works best when it prevents heat from escaping downward. You spread coat sacks, anything soft and dry, building a barrier between your body and the boards. As you lie down, you notice how the cold pulls differently when you're still. Movement generates heat. Stillness lets it leak away. You flex your feet slowly, then stop conserving energy. Balance again. Always balance. There is a quiet belief among some travellers that sleeping with your head slightly elevated helps preserve warmth. You prop yours on a folded sack, unsure if it helps but willing to try. Comfort and superstition blend easily at this hour. The wagon creaks as someone shifts outside. You hear the soft thump of a body settling beneath it. Another chooses the open ground, perhaps preferring space to shelter. Everyone negotiates with the night in their own way. You pull your bedroll snug but not tight. Too much pressure flattens insulation. You leave a small pocket of air near your chest, breathing carefully into it. The air warms faintly, becoming your own private climate. You try not to disturb it. Sleep comes unevenly. You drift, then wake when a board presses too sharply into bone. You shift slowly, carefully, rebuilding warmth after each movement. Frustration flickers, then fades. Anger wastes energy. Acceptance conserves it. There are differing interpretations among historians about whether settlers slept more deeply inside wagons or beneath them. Some accounts praise the shelter. Others complain of cold seeping through every surface. Lying here, you suspect the answer depended on the night, the wagon, the wind, and the person. You notice how sound behaves differently in each sleeping place. Inside the wagon, noises feel close contained. Outside, the wind carries everything away. Underneath, sound vibrates through wood and earth. Each space has its own character, its own rhythm. At some point, fatigue outweighs discomfort. Your body finds a way to relax despite the hard floor and creeping cold. Breathing slows. Thoughts loosen their grip. You stop cataloguing sensations and simply exist within them. When you wake briefly near dawn, your back aches and your limbs feel stiff. But you are warm enough, not comfortable, not rested, but intact. You take that as a victory. As you lie there waiting for light, you realize how much effort goes into something as simple as sleep. On the plains, rest is not passive. It is built, adjusted, defended hour by hour. And each morning you wake at all feels like proof that the choices you made in the dark were just good enough. You wake with a familiar chill that feels deeper than before, the kind that settles into joints and refuses to leave quickly. As you stretch carefully, you notice dampness along your collar and under your arms. Not sweat exactly, but the residue of effort, breath, and shifting bodies. Moisture is subtle. It arrives quietly, then waits for the cold to finish the job. As evening returns, you think about dryness more than warmth. Staying dry has become its own discipline. Many people on the trail learned often the hard way that wet fabric steals heat faster than bare air. You run your fingers along your sleeves, checking for stiffness. Damp wool feels heavier, colder, almost resentful. You resist the urge to overdress before night fully arrives. The sun lingers just long enough to tempt you into comfort, and that is where mistakes happen. You remember how easily sweat forms during small tasks like gathering fuel or adjusting loads. Even mild exertion can betray you later. You slow your movements, deliberately pacing yourself as if the night is already watching. There is a quiet routine to airing clothing when possible. You hang items briefly near the fire, turning them often, careful not to scorch. Steam rises faintly, carrying the sharp smell of damp wool. The warmth feels good, but you keep a respectful distance. Fires are not forgiving of impatience. An odd practice you notice among a few seasoned travellers involves loosening layers just before sleep, even in the cold. The idea is to let excess heat escape so sweat does not build. You try it reluctantly, feeling exposed for a moment, then surprised when your skin stays dry as you settle. The air grows colder as darkness deepens and moisture becomes more dangerous. Breath condenses on fabric, especially around scarves and collars. You lower cloth slightly, allowing vapour to escape rather than soak in. The decision feels counterintuitive, but experience has taught you to trust small adjustments. You slide into your bedroll, slowly aware of how dampness travels. A wet patch against skin chills, quickly spreading cold outward. You shift until the contact is minimal, then still yourself. Every movement risks creating more moisture. Stillness becomes strategy. You notice how the cold feels different tonight. It bites sharper where fabric is damp, duller where it remains dry. Your body maps these differences instantly. Ankles, wrists, neck. You tuck and adjust sealing gaps carefully without trapping breath. A strange bit of frontier logic suggests that sleeping slightly cooler at first helps prevent sweating later. You're not sure who first believed this, but you feel its truth settling in. The cold is uncomfortable, but manageable. Damp cold would be worse. Outside, the wind picks up again, carrying fine snow that melts on contact with canvas and wool. You hear the faint hiss of it, then feel the chill as moisture spreads. Someone shakes out a blanket, sharply sending ice crystals flying. The sound is crisp, satisfying. There is ongoing discussion among researchers about how much settlers consciously understood the dangers of moisture versus learning through repeated failure. Watching the careful movements around you, you suspect knowledge travelled informally shared through observation rather than explanation. You copy what seems to work. You adjust your sleeping position to avoid pressure points where moisture might collect. Compression squeezes warmth out of fabric, but it also traps dampness. You find a balance shifting until your weight feels evenly distributed. Comfort is secondary. Dryness is essential. The smells of the night change as moisture freezes. Wool loses its warmth scent, replaced by something sharper, cleaner. The air feels brittle. Sound carries farther again. You hear a distant animal call thin and clear through the cold. You breathe slowly, deliberately directing air away from fabric when possible. Each breath feels precious. Warm air wasted is warmth lost. You think about how much of survival here happens without tools or supplies. It happens in awareness. Sleep comes in light waves. You wake briefly when cold touches a damp spot, then settle again once it equalizes. Your body adapts, redistributing heat as best it can. You stop fighting the process and let it work. There is no clear agreement among historians on how many deaths attributed to cold were actually caused by moisture-related heat loss. The records blur exposure illness and exhaustion together. Lying here, you understand how easily one leads to the other. Cold rarely acts alone. As the night wears on, frost forms again, glittering faintly in starlight. You avoid touching the canvas where ice gathers. Contact would melt it, soak fabric, start the cycle again. You remain still patient, conserving what you can. Near dawn, you wake with stiffness rather than shivering. That feels like progress. Your clothes are dry enough, your core holds. You stretch fingers slowly inside sleeves, testing sensation. Pain, yes, but also warmth returning. You wait for light without rushing. Morning will bring movement, which will bring sweat, which will require attention all over again. For now you lie still, wrapped in layers that are dry enough, breathing carefully into the cold. You have learned another quiet rule of the plains. Warmth matters, dryness decides. You notice that some nights feel easier than others, even when the cold is just as sharp. The difference is subtle, woven into habits you did not invent yourself. They come from watching, copying, borrowing. Survival out here is rarely original. It is inherited. As evening settles, you see someone shaping the camp a little differently. A fire placed not where it looks best, but where wind bends around the wagons. Bedding arranged crosswise rather than straight. A strip of hide hung low to block a draft you barely felt. None of this is explained. It is simply done and it works. You realize many of these choices did not originate with settlers at all. Long before wagons creaked across the plains, people lived here year-round, enduring colder nights with fewer supplies. Their knowledge did not arrive in books or manuals. It moved through observation, trade, and quiet imitation. You're participating in that transfer now, whether you acknowledge it or not. Someone shows you how to scrape frost from the inside of canvas before it melts. The motion is quick, and practice pushing ice outward rather than brushing it down onto bedding. You try it yourself and feel an immediate difference. Less dampness, less chill. It feels like discovering a shortcut. You hear a story passed softly near the fire about sleeping positions that reduce heat loss, knees drawn up, spine curved slightly, back turned to the wind even when sheltered. The advice is not framed as instruction. It is framed as something that worked once long ago for someone else. That is often how knowledge survives. You begin to notice how often tools and materials serve multiple purposes. A hide is a blanket, a door, a wall. A cooking pot becomes a heat reflector. Stones warmed by the fire are wrapped in cloth and placed near feet. The idea is simple. Hold warmth where the body struggles most. You try it pressing warm stone near your ankles and sigh quietly as sensation returns. There is a strange respect in these borrowed practices. You do not fully understand them, but you trust the results. Some people dismiss them as superstition. Others swear by them. Out here, the line between the two is thin and mostly irrelevant. What matters is whether you shiver less. You notice differences in how people respond. Some adopt new habits quickly. Others resist clinging to familiar routines even when they fail. Pride has weight. So does fear of the unknown. You feel both tugging at you, then let results decide. The night deepens and the wind shifts again. Someone adjusts the fire pit, lowering it further into the earth. The flame steadies. Smoke thins. You file that away. Another quiet lesson learned without words. You think about how knowledge travels without permission. A trick seen once becomes habit. A habit shared becomes tradition. Years later, no one remembers where it came from, only that it works. The plains are full of these invisible inheritances. You try sleeping with your head oriented differently, following a suggestion overheard earlier. The change feels minor, but the draft no longer brushes your neck. That alone feels worth the adjustment. You tuck fabric more carefully, shaping your bedding like a nest rather than a flat surface. You wake briefly in the night and notice you're warmer than expected. Not comfortable, but steady. The difference is not dramatic. It is cumulative. Many small choices layering together until the cold loses some of its edge. You wonder how many of these practices will be remembered later, written down, passed on, and how many will vanish with the people who used them. The thought feels heavy and fleeting at the same time. Survival knowledge does not always announce itself. It hides in habits. A voice nearby mutters in their sleep, repeating a phrase you do not catch. Another sleeper shifts, pulling a blanket higher in a way that mirrors something you did earlier. The mimicry is unconscious now. The camp moves as a system adjusting together. When you wake near dawn, you feel tired but functional. That feels like success. You stretch slowly, testing stiffness, checking for numbness. Everything responds. Not quickly, but enough. You sit up and look around, noticing how the camp bears the marks of borrowed wisdom. Canvas hung just so. Fires placed with intention. Bedding arranged in ways that look odd to an outsider. The scene feels less improvised than before, shaped by hands that learned from others. As light creeps in, you realize that surviving the coldest nights on the plains was never about one clever solution. It was about listening, watching, adapting. letting go of the idea that you know best. You pack up slowly, already aware that tonight will bring new conditions and new lessons. The land does not repeat itself exactly. Neither can you. You carry forward what worked, discard what did not, and remain open to whatever the next night demands. For now the cold loosens its grip slightly as the sun rises. You breathe easier. You have learned something you cannot quite name, but you feel it in your bones. The plains taught it to you in the dark using the language of necessity. By now you've grown used to the presence of animals at night, not just as cargo or companions, but as quiet contributors to survival. As evening settles, you notice how people guide livestock closer than during warmer nights. Oxen, horses and mules are positioned deliberately, not randomly. Distance matters. Too close brings danger. Too far wastes an opportunity. You feel the difference immediately when the animals are nearby. Their bodies radiate warmth steadily, a low heat that does not flicker like fire. When the wind cuts across the camp, it breaks slightly around their mass. The air feels less sharp, less eager to strip heat away. You had not realized how much space animals occupy until you feel what happens when they do. Some people choose to sleep near the animals despite the smell and noise. The scent is strong, a mix of hay, hide and dung, but it signals life. The animals shift occasionally, stamping hooves, snorting softly. Each sound reassures you that they are still there, still warm, still breathing. You learn quickly that animals must be managed carefully at night. If they grow restless, they can trample bedding or knock over gear. A startled horse in the dark is not something you want to deal with. Someone takes time to calm them before settling down, speaking softly, moving slowly. Familiarity keeps everyone safer. There is an unspoken understanding that animals come first in extreme cold. If they weaken or fall ill, the journey falters. You watch as extra feed is given even when supplies are tight. The logic is simple. A warm-fed animal produces heat movement and transport. A dead one produces nothing. You notice how people use animals as windbreaks as much as heat sources. Wagons are positioned so that livestock block prevailing gusts. The effect is subtle but real. Wind loses some of its force before it reaches human bodies. You stand in the lee of a horse for a moment and feel the difference instantly. At some point in the night you wake to the sound of hooves shifting. An ox lowers itself, slowly settling into the cold ground. The movement sends a faint tremor through the earth. You realize that animals conserve heat much like people do, curling, minimizing exposure, resting deeply. There is disagreement among those on the trail about how close is too close. Some fear disease, others fear accidents. Still others trust experience over caution. Watching the varied arrangements across the camp, you see no single rule. Each group balances risk differently. You try sleeping nearer the animals tonight, positioning yourself where warmth drifts without pressing in. The air smells stronger here, but it also feels steadier. The cold seems less aggressive, as if slowed by the presence of large breathing bodies. You become aware of how animals influence sound. Their bulk absorbs wind noise. Their breathing adds rhythm to the night. Instead of the sharp whistle of air, you hear softer movement, a living backdrop. The plains feel less empty. At one point, a horse exhales sharply, sending a cloud of steam into the air. The sight is oddly comforting. Proof of warmth made visible. You imagine how much heat that body must hold, how much effort it takes to maintain it through the night. You remain alert though. Animals can kick. They can shift suddenly. You keep a careful distance, ready to move if needed. Comfort never replaces awareness out here. It only coexists with it. As the night wears on, you realize how intertwined survival has become. Humans rely on animals. Animals rely on humans. Warmth circulates between species exchanged through proximity and care. This relationship feels ancient, older than wagons, older than trails. When dawn approaches, frost clings to manes and tails sparkling faintly. Animals rise stiffly, shaking ice from their coats. You do the same joints, protesting breath fogging. Everyone has endured the night together. You step away from the animals as light grows stronger, grateful for what they offered. They did not choose this journey any more than you did, yet they carried warmth through the dark without complaint. As the sun climbs, the cold retreats slightly. The night's lesson lingers. Heat does not only come from fire or clothing. Sometimes it comes from standing near another living thing and letting shared warmth do quiet work until morning arrives. By the time darkness settles again, you feel it not just on your skin but in your thoughts. Cold has a way of getting inside the mind, slowing it, sharpening it, sometimes twisting it. Fatigue has been building for days now, layered like the clothing you wear. At night, when movement stops, it all surfaces. You notice how patience thins as the temperature drops. Small inconveniences feel larger, a misplaced tool, a slow response, a careless bump in the dark. None of it matters much, but it all feels heavier when you are cold. Your tolerance shrinks along with the daylight. You hear a quiet argument break out near the wagons. It never rises to shouting, just clipped words, tight voices. Someone forgot to secure a canvas flap. Someone else stepped on a bedroll. These are not real problems. They are symptoms. Cold drains emotional reserves as efficiently as it drains heat. You catch yourself snapping internally over nothing. The thought surprises you. You were not like this before, or maybe you were, but comfort hid it. Out here with warmth rationed and sleep fragmented, every flaw feels closer to the surface. You breathe slowly, deliberately, choosing not to speak. Morale becomes something you feel rather than discuss. When spirits are high, people move more smoothly. When they dip, everything feels harder. Nights are where morale erodes most quietly. Darkness leaves room for worry to wander. You remember hearing someone say that the cold makes you stupid. It sounded harsh at the time, but now you understand the meaning. Decision-making slows. Focus drifts. You have to work harder to think clearly. That effort costs energy you do not have to spare. Some people respond by withdrawing. They grow quieter, retreating into themselves. Others respond by talking more, filling the dark with stories or complaints. Neither approach is wrong. Both are attempts to stay connected to something warmer than the air. You notice small acts meant to lift spirits. Someone hums softly while settling down. Someone shares a bit of food they had been saving. Someone cracks a joke that falls flat then laughs anyway. The sound is thin but real. Fear behaves differently at night. During the day it is tied to visible risks. Terrain, weather, distance. At night it becomes abstract. What if the cold gets worse? What if someone falls ill? What if the animals panic? These thoughts drift in without invitation. You counter them with routine. You check your bedding. You adjust your layers. You place your boots where you can find them easily in the dark. Familiar actions anchor you. They remind your body that you have done this before and survived. You realize that morale is contagious. So is despair. You choose carefully what you project. A steady presence helps others steady themselves. Even silence can be supportive if it feels calm rather than withdrawn. At some point you feel the weight of loneliness settle in despite the people nearby. Cold isolates. It wraps you inward. You acknowledge the feeling without feeding it. Naming it helps. Loneliness is easier to carry when recognized. You think about why people keep going. Land, opportunity, obligation, pride, love waiting somewhere far ahead. Motivation feels distant at night, abstract and fragile. But it's still there, tucked away like a coal glowing faintly. Sleep comes slowly. Your mind circles the same thoughts, then gradually loosens its grip. The cold remains, but it feels less personal now, more like a condition than an enemy. That shift matters. When you wake briefly before dawn, you notice the camp is quiet. Not tense, just tired. Breathing is steady. No one is arguing. The night has taken its toll, but it has not broken anyone. You lie there waiting for light understanding that surviving the cold is not just about insulation and fire. It is about keeping your thoughts from freezing too. about choosing patience over irritation, routine over panic, and quiet resilience over despair. As the first pale hint of morning creeps in, you feel something loosen inside you. Another night endured, another small victory. Morale does not surge, it simply holds, and out here holding is enough. You spend the daylight hours collecting things that barely seem worth picking up. Dry grass pulled from sheltered hollows, strips of cloth trimmed from worn garments, bits of packing straw shaken loose from crates. None of it looks like insulation at first glance. Together it becomes something else. When evening approaches, you work quietly, stuffing these scraps into every gap you can find. Cracks between wagon boards, spaces where canvas meets wood, corners that always seem colder than the rest. You push material in with numb fingers until resistance tells you the space is full. The wagon looks messier now, but it feels tighter, less leaky. You notice how the air behaves differently once the gaps are filled. Drafts soften. Cold no longer rushes in with the same eagerness. It still arrives, but slower, dulled. That difference feels enormous when you're measuring comfort in degrees and minutes. Someone nearby uses mud mixed with grass to seal a persistent opening near a wheel hub. It freezes quickly, forming a crude plug. You watch, then copy the idea on a smaller crack near your sleeping spot. The result is ugly but effective. Appearance has lost its importance. You crawl inside the wagon and sit still for a moment, testing the space. The air feels heavier, more contained. Sound changes too. Wind becomes a low pressure rather than a whistle. The wagon groans less. You breathe out, slowly relieved. There is something satisfying about this kind of work. It feels proactive, even creative. You're shaping your environment instead of enduring it. That sense of control matters more than the actual temperature drop it prevents. As night deepens, you realize insulation does not create warmth. It only preserves what you already have. You still need fire food movement. But insulation buys time. It stretches the usefulness of every other effort. You lie down and notice how much longer warmth lingers after you settle. The bedroll feels less shocked by your weight. Cold no longer surges up immediately from below. You adjust once, then stay still, unwilling to disturb the fragile balance you have built. Someone outside curses softly as a loose bundle of grass blows free. They chase it down, laughing briefly despite themselves. Even frustration feels lighter when progress has been made. You wake briefly in the night and realize you're not shivering. That absence feels almost startling. You listen, waiting for cold to catch up. It does not yet. The insulation is doing its quiet work. Your thoughts drift toward the idea of home. Walls thick enough to forget about wind. Floors that do not steal heat. You imagine it clearly, then let the thought fade. Longing burns energy. You need rest. The night passes in smaller pieces than usual. You wake less often. When you do, the cold feels muted rather than sharp. You adjust a hand, tuck a shoulder, then drift again. Near dawn, frost coats the outside of the wagon heavily. Inside, the canvas remains mostly dry. You brush a hand along it and feel only chill, not dampness. That feels like a triumph. As light creeps in, you sit up slowly, joints stiff but functional. You glance around at the stuffed cracks, the awkward bundles, the mud plugs already beginning to crumble. They look temporary because they are. Everything here is temporary. Still, they carried you through another night. You pack them away or discard them without ceremony. Their value has already been spent. As you step out into the pale morning, cold air bites your face again. You accept it calmly. You know now that night can be shaped, nudged, softened at the edges. Not conquered, just managed. And that knowledge stays with you as you shoulder your tasks for the day, already thinking ahead to what else you might wedge stuff or seal before darkness returns. By late afternoon, the land begins to slope almost imperceptibly, and you know water is near before you see it. The air carries a different smell, sharper and cleaner with a faint metallic edge. When the river finally appears, it looks solid and calm, its surface pale and unmoving beneath the cold sky. At night, frozen water feels less like a boundary and more like a promise that might break without warning. As darkness settles, the river becomes something else entirely. During the day you can read it. You see cracks, snow drifts, darker patches where ice is thinner. At night, all of that disappears into a single flat tone. The surface reflects starlight just enough to blur depth and distance. You feel cautious without fully knowing why. People debate quietly where to camp. Close to the river means access to water and some shelter from wind. Too close brings risk. Ice shifts when temperatures change, and night is when those changes happen fastest. You listen to the discussion without adding much. The Coldest taught you that confidence often hides uncertainty. The camp settles a careful distance away. Fires are kept small. Movement slows. You hear the river before you feel it. A low groan travels through the ice, deep and resonant like the sound of wood under strain. It makes your chest tighten. Someone nearby mutters that the river is talking. No one laughs. You lie down, facing away from the water, but the sound reaches you anyway. Ice expands and contracts with temperature, and the river answers with cracks, pops, and long moaning shifts. The noise is unsettling because it feels purposeful, even though it is not. It reminds you that solid ground is sometimes only pretending. You wake briefly when a sharp crack snaps through the night. Your heart races before you recognize it as ice adjusting, not breaking. Still, you sit up for a moment listening. The sound fades into softer creaks. You breathe again. Some people choose to sleep closer to the wagons, putting wooden wheels between themselves and the river. Others trust distance alone. You choose position carefully, not too near, not too far. Balance again. Always balance. The cold near water feels different. It sinks lower, heavier, as if pulled downward by the river itself. You tuck your legs in tighter, protecting joints that ache more sharply here. Moisture in the air makes everything feel colder, even when temperatures do not change. At some point in the night, you hear a splash far off, muted but distinct. It might be a chunk of ice breaking free upstream. It might be something else. You never find out. The sound lingers in your thoughts longer than it should. You remember someone earlier testing the ice with a long pole, listening to the response. Solid ice answers with a dull thud. Weak ice sings higher, sharper. That memory returns now uninvited. You wonder what the ice beneath the river is saying in the dark. Despite the unease, there is comfort here too. The river blocks wind from one direction, creating a pocket of calmer air. You notice how your fire burns steadier, how smoke rises instead of flattening. You angle your bedding slightly, taking advantage of it. Sleep comes in fragments. Dreams are shallow and uneasy, filled with shifting ground and distant echoes. When you wake, you listen first, then move. Stillness feels safer near water at night. You think about how many decisions on this journey are made with incomplete information. You rarely know the full risk, you only sense it. The river teaches that lesson quietly. It looks stable. It sounds restless. Both are true. Near dawn, the ice quiets. The temperature steadies. The river settles into silence that feels almost deliberate. You sit up slowly, stretching fingers and toes, testing sensation. Everything responds. As light grows, the river reveals itself again. Cracks appear where you heard them forming. Lines snake across the surface, dark and jagged. You feel relief that you did not camp closer. You also feel respect. The river did nothing dramatic. It simply existed on its own terms. You pack up with care, watching where you step. Crossing will come later in daylight with planning and caution. Night is not the time for frozen rivers. As you move away, the cold feels lighter again, less weighted. You glance back, once committing the sound of ice to memory. It is not something you want to forget. Another night has passed, another lesson absorbed. The plains offer many dangers, but some of the quietest ones lie flat and still waiting for darkness to make them harder to read. You notice sickness first in the quiet moments. Not during the day when movement distracts and sunlight hides pallor, But at night, when bodies are still and every sound feels louder, a cough carries farther in the cold. A groan feels heavier. Darkness turns small symptoms into worries. As evening settles, you hear someone breathing unevenly nearby. It is not dramatic, just slightly off rhythm, enough to make you listen more closely. You pretend not to notice at first because noticing feels like inviting trouble. But the sound keeps returning, persistent. Cold makes illness feel closer. Fevers burn hotter against freezing air. Chills dig deeper. You watch as someone wraps themselves in extra layers, then unwraps them again moments later, unable to find balance. The body struggles when it cannot regulate itself. There is little that can be done at night beyond observation and comfort. You offer water. You adjust bedding. You keep the fire alive a little longer than usual, even though fuel is scarce. Warmth becomes medicine when nothing else is available. You're careful about distance now. Close enough to help. Far enough to avoid spreading whatever might be brewing. The tension sits quietly between care and caution. No one says it aloud, but everyone feels it. You notice how illness changes the mood of the camp. Voices lower, movements soften. The night feels more fragile. Cold nights already demand attention. Adding sickness sharpens that demand. Someone murmurs about frostbitten fingers from the previous storm. Another mentions a lingering fever that has not broken in days. These conversations stay hushed, as if speaking them too loudly might make things worse. You wake briefly to the sound of someone retching softly in the dark. It is quickly managed. A pot passed, a blanket adjusted. No one makes a fuss. Fuss wastes energy. Dignity matters even here. The cold makes recovery slower. Bodies need calories rest and warmth to heal. At night, all three are limited. You watch someone shiver uncontrollably and know that shivering itself burns precious reserves. You feel helpless and useful at the same time. You remember how easily minor injuries become serious when sleep is poor and nights are cold. A cracked lip, a cut finger. Infection feels closer here, less theoretical. You clean your own hands carefully before settling back down. Sleep comes reluctantly. Your mind circles worries you cannot solve in the dark. You remind yourself that dawn brings options, movement, sun, decisions. Night is for endurance. You wake again when the wind shifts, carrying a new chill. The sick person has gone quiet. You listen carefully, counting breaths. The rhythm steadies. Relief washes through you slowly, careful not to wake them. As the hours pass, the night does what it always does. It tests, it waits, it asks nothing and takes much. You sit with that, breathing evenly, sharing warmth where you can. Near dawn, you feel stiffness set in, but also gratitude. No crisis erupted. No emergency demanded action beyond patience. Sometimes survival is measured by what does not happen. As light returns, colour creeps back into faces. The sick look tired but present. That feels like success. You know the road ahead will not be easier, but this night did not take more than it already had. You stretch slowly joints, aching, and prepare for the day. Illness will be addressed in daylight. For now, the night has passed and everyone is still here. That is enough. You learn to respect fire most when it frightens you. Not when it warms your hands or lights familiar faces, but when it reminds you how quickly comfort can turn sharp. Night is when mistakes show their teeth. The fire burns low tonight, tucked close to canvas and wood. It feels safe, controlled, almost tame. That is when danger slips in. A sudden gust pushes sparks sideways instead of upward. One lands where it should not. You smell it before you see it. Hot fabric, sharp and unmistakable. Someone reacts instantly, slapping at the spot with a gloved hand. Another grabs a blanket and smothers the ember before it can spread. The moment passes quickly, but the silence afterward is heavy. Hearts beat louder than the wind for a few seconds. Then breathing returns to normal. You sit very still, aware of how close that came. Fire does not announce its intentions, it waits for carelessness. Night makes carelessness easier. Eyes are tired, hands are slower, judgment dulls. After that, everyone shifts a little farther back. The fire is adjusted, lowered, fed more carefully. Sparks are watched with renewed attention. No one scolds. Fear has already done its work. You remember stories whispered on the trail about entire camps lost in moments like this. Canvas catches fast, bedding follows. In the dark, escape becomes confusion. You picture it unwillingly, then push the image away. Dwelling helps no one. The smell of scorched cloth lingers faintly. It mixes with smoke and wool, creating a warning you will not forget soon. Your nose wrinkles every time the wind shifts, checking for it again. Someone mentions quietly that fires are safest when they are boring. No drama, no flair, just steady heat. You nod even if no one is looking. Excitement belongs to daylight. Night demands restraint. You settle back into your bedroll with new caution. You position yourself so you can reach the fire if needed, but not close enough to be threatened by it. Distance becomes part of your safety plan. Sleep is lighter now. Every crackle pulls you halfway awake. You listen differently, attuned not just to wind and animals, but to the tone of the fire itself. Too loud, too quiet. Either could mean trouble. At one point, a log shifts unexpectedly, sending a brief spray of sparks upward. You sit up, immediately scanning. They fade harmlessly into the dark. You exhale slowly and lie back down, reminding yourself not to hold tension too long. The cold presses in harder without the fire's full warmth. You accept it. Cold is easier to manage than flame. You tuck your hands under your arms and breathe evenly, choosing chill over risk. Hours pass this way, alertness rising and falling. Eventually the fire settles into a deep bed of embers glowing softly without movement. That feels right. Safe. You relax slightly, letting sleep deepen again. Near dawn, you wake to the smell of ash and frost. The fire is nearly gone, just a faint red glow beneath grey. You feel relief rather than disappointment. Daylight is close. Fire can rest. As light returns, you look at the small darkened patch on the canvas where the spark landed. It is no bigger than a coin, a mark not a hole, a reminder. You pack up, carefully handling fire tools with respect. Ash is scattered, embers are drowned, nothing is left to chance. You have learned that warmth demands vigilance, and vigilance does not sleep easily. As you move on, the memory of that spark stays with you. Cold can be endured. Fire must be managed. On the plains at night, both are powerful and neither forgives distraction. You have heard the stories long before you ever felt the cold yourself. Tales of iron-willed settlers who slept soundly under stars, laughed at winter, and rose each morning ready for more. Those stories feel thinner now, stretched by repetition and distance. Night on the plains has taught you something quieter and less flattering. As darkness settles, you think about how different the truth feels from the legend. Strength here is not loud. It is not dramatic. It looks like someone pulling a blanket higher without complaint. It sounds like a sigh instead of a boast. Endurance does not announce itself. You notice how tired everyone looks in the firelight. Faces are lined, eyes rimmed with red. Movements are careful, conserving effort. No one looks heroic. Everyone looks human. That feels important, somehow even comforting. You remember illustrations you once saw of westward travel. Clean wagons, upright figures, smiling faces framed by open sky. The images did not include the nights. They skipped over the hours when nothing moves except breath and worry. Here, hardiness is not about ignoring discomfort. It is about responding to it intelligently. You watch someone adjust their bedding 3 times before settling, refusing to accept a draft they know will steal warmth later. That is not weakness. That is experience. Someone nearby mutters that people back east would not believe how cold it gets out here. The comment is not bitter, just factual. Cold on the plains feels different. It is open, persistent, without edges to hide behind. You think about how stories are shaped by daylight. Daytime effort is visible. Nighttime endurance is private. No one is watching when you wake shivering, or when fear creeps in during the long hours before dawn. Those moments rarely make it into memory or myth. You feel a quiet pride in surviving the night, even though it does not feel like an achievement worth bragging about. It feels personal, internal, like holding your breath and releasing it slowly when morning finally comes. The fire tonight is modest. No one tries to make it impressive. Heat is measured, controlled. You warm your hands briefly, then pull back satisfied. Comfort is rationed, not chased. You settle into your bedroll and notice how quickly your thoughts turn inward. Cold strips away excess thinking. It leaves only what matters. Am I warm enough? Am I dry? Can I rest? Everything else can wait. You hear someone nearby telling a child that pioneers were tough people. The child asks quietly if that means they did not feel cold. There is a pause before the answer comes. They felt it. They just kept going. The honesty feels heavier than the myth. Sleep arrives slowly. You do not fight it. You accept its shallow edges, knowing deep rest is rare out here. Even a little is enough to carry you forward. When you wake briefly, you realize the camp is quiet in a different way. Not tense, not fearful, just settled. The night has been endured, not conquered. As dawn approaches, you feel a shift inside you. The legend of frontier toughness has softened, reshaped by lived experience. Strength is no longer something you imagine as unbreakable. It is flexible, adaptable, patient. You sit up when light returns, joints aching, breath fogging. You do not feel triumphant. You feel capable. That feels better. As you pack up, you glance once more at the wide horizon. The plains do not care about stories told later. They care only about how you behave when the temperature drops and the light fades. And now you understand that surviving the coldest nights was never about being fearless. It was about being attentive, humble, and willing to learn. You start to notice the work that happens after dark because it rarely looks like work at all. There is no announcement, no clear beginning or end. It slips into the night, quietly carried out by hands that keep moving even when bodies are tired. The cold does not pause for rest, and neither do the tasks that hold it back. As evening settles, you see women moving through the camp with purpose that feels practiced. Bedding is checked. Extra layers appear where they are needed most. Someone notices a draft and fills it without comment. Another rewinds a loose strap so canvas will not flap all night. These actions are small, almost invisible, but the difference they make lasts for hours. You realize how much of nighttime survival depends on anticipation. Someone remembers who shivered the night before and adjusts their blankets first. Someone else notices a child already fading with exhaustion and feeds them before hunger turns to cold. None of this is dramatic. It is steady, observant, relentless. You sit quietly and watch as food is portioned with care. The warmest bits go to those who need them most. Fat is scraped deliberately from a pot and saved not for taste but for energy. A cup of broth is carried across the dark, held carefully so not a drop spills. The smell follows briefly, rich and comforting, then disappears into the cold. Hands work even when faces show fatigue. Fingers are cracked red, stiff from repeated exposure. They move anyway. You notice how often warmth is given away. A shawl placed over shoulders that are not your own. A hot stone tucked near someone else's feet. Care travels outward in the dark. There is a rhythm to this labour. It flows between cooking, mending, tending, soothing. A torn sleeve is stitched just enough to block wind. A bootlace is replaced so fumbling fingers will not struggle later. These are preventative acts. They keep small problems from becoming dangerous ones by morning. You hear quiet murmurs meant to calm rather than instruct. A reminder to eat slowly. A suggestion to move closer to the fire before it fades. Words chosen carefully. Tone matters at night. Harshness lingers longer in the cold. You notice how rarely this work is acknowledged. There are no thanks exchanged, no sense of obligation spoken aloud. It simply happens night after night. Survival here is not evenly distributed. Some roles remain visible, others fade into the background even as they shape everything. When someone falls ill or grows weak, the response is immediate and organized. Bedding is rearranged, warmth redirected, watchfulness increases. You see how care sharpens under pressure rather than collapsing. The cold forces efficiency. There is no room for wasted motion. You think about how history remembers effort. It favors movement conflict milestones. It rarely pauses to observe the quiet hours where nothing seems to happen, yet everything depends on it. These nights would fall apart without this unseen labour. You feel a shift in how you understand endurance. It is not only about standing up to cold, it is about noticing it early, about responding before it bites too deeply. That kind of awareness takes energy of its own. As the night deepens, you see someone still awake when others have settled. They move slowly, checking edges, pressing down blankets, making sure fires are safe. The glow from embers lights their hands briefly, then fades. They do not sit until everything else is in place. You realize that rest is often delayed not because it is unavailable, but because it is postponed for others. Sleep comes later lighter, interrupted by listening. That choice carries a cost. You feel respect settle in your chest, heavy and quiet. At some point you wake and notice a blanket tucked more securely around your shoulders than you remember doing yourself. The realization brings a warmth that has nothing to do with insulation. You do not ask who did it. You simply accept it. The night passes with fewer disturbances. Drafts are blocked. Hunger is held at bay. Fear stays low. You suspect none of that happened by accident. When dawn approaches, the work finally slows. People who stayed awake the longest settle in for brief rest as light creeps back into the world. Their faces look drawn but steady. Another night held together. As you rise and stretch, you carry the awareness with you. Survival on the plains is not only about strength or planning, it is about constant quiet attention, about labour that does not ask to be seen. You step into the cold morning air and feel how well the camp held overnight. That success did not happen on its own. It was built in whispers, movements and decisions made long after the sun went down. The night has passed, the work continues, and now that you have seen it, you will never unsee how much of survival happens quietly after dark in the hands of those who refuse to let the cold take more than it already has. The cold reaches a different quality tonight, one that feels almost unreal. You sense it before anyone says a word. Breath hangs longer in the air, sound carries farther. Even movement feels slower, as if the night itself has thickened. You pull your coat tighter and feel fabric stiffen beneath your fingers. Someone checks a small thermometer tied to a wagon brace and exhales sharply. The number means little on its own, but the reaction tells you enough. This is the kind of cold people remember decades later, the kind they measure other winters against for the rest of their lives. You feel it settle into you as soon as the sun disappears. Not a sudden bite, but a steady, relentless pressure. The cold does not rush. It advances patiently, inch by inch, waiting for you to stop paying attention. You refuse to give it that opening. The fire struggles tonight. Flames seem smaller than usual, reluctant to rise. Fuel disappears faster, eaten by the air. You hold your hands close, rotating them slowly, aware that even a moment too near could numb fingers rather than warm them. Extremes blur together at temperatures like this. You notice how people move differently now. No wasted gestures, no unnecessary trips away from shelter. Everything is deliberate, economical. The cold has imposed rules, and everyone obeys them instinctively. Your eyelashes frost over again, heavier this time. When you blink, the sensation is sharp enough to make you pause. You tilt your head slightly, letting warmth from your breath soften the ice before opening your eyes fully. Small techniques matter more tonight than ever. You tuck yourself into your bedding and feel the cold rise from below immediately. Even layers struggle against it. You adjust, adding insulation beneath rather than above, then curl inward. Your body knows what to do before your mind catches up. Someone nearby mutters that this is the cold that kills quietly. No wind, no storm, just temperature sinking so low that the body gives up without drama. The comment hangs in the air, then fades. Fear is acknowledged and set aside. Panic would be useless now. You focus on sensation instead. The pressure of fabric, the rhythm of breath, the faint warmth trapped between layers. You measure time in heartbeats rather than minutes. Each one feels earned. At some point you realize shivering has stopped. That should worry you, but you recognize the difference between danger and adaptation. Your muscles are conserving energy, not surrendering. You flex fingers and toes gently, just enough to keep sensation alive. The night feels endless. The stars seem sharper, brighter, as if cold has polished them. The sky stretches vast and indifferent above you. You feel small, but also strangely steady. This is not a night for thoughts of the future. It is a night for presence. You hear someone softly counting breaths nearby. Another hums under their breath, barely audible. These sounds feel intentional, like anchors thrown into the dark. You latch onto them without thinking. You wake briefly and realize you're still conscious, still aware. That feels like success. You resist the urge to move too much. Motion steals heat faster than it creates it now. Stillness becomes a form of discipline. The cold presses against your face, finding every exposed inch. You pull fabric higher, leaving just enough space to breathe. Moisture freezes instantly. You adjust again, learning in real time. Near dawn, the cold reaches its deepest point. Everything feels brittle. The world seems made of glass. When someone shifts, the sound carries too clearly too far. You remain motionless, waiting for light the way you would wait for rescue. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, the edge softens. It is not warmth, just less cold. Enough to notice, enough to hope. When dawn finally arrives, it does not bring comfort. It brings confirmation. Frost coats everything thickly. Breath clouds the air in heavy plumes. Faces look pale but alert. You look at your hands, flexing them carefully. They respond. People speak quietly, voices rough but steady. No one celebrates. Surviving a night like this does not inspire joy. It inspires respect. As the sun climbs higher, the cold retreats inch by inch. You feel exhaustion settle in heavy and deep. But beneath it is something else. A quiet pride. You endured one of the coldest nights the plains can offer, not through bravado, but through attention and restraint. You pack slowly, finger-stiff movements, careful. The memory of this night will linger not as a story you tell loudly, but as a standard. Whenever future cold feels harsh, you will remember this, and know what true cold really is. Another day begins. The plains remain wide and indifferent, and you move forward carrying the knowledge that even nights like this can be survived one careful breath at a time. Night falls gently tonight, almost politely, as if making amends for what came before. The cold remains, but it no longer feels aggressive. It feels familiar. After nights like the last one, familiarity itself becomes a kind of comfort. You settle into routines that now feel ritualistic. The same order, the same motions, boots placed here, bedding laid just so, hands rubbed together before touching metal. These small acts carry meaning beyond their function. They tell your body that it knows what to do. As darkness deepens, you notice people turning inward in quieter ways. Someone closes their eyes and murmurs words you cannot hear. Another traces a small symbol into the dirt with a fingertip before brushing it away. Belief takes many forms out here, and not all of them need names. You find yourself repeating familiar motions too. Counting breaths, pressing palms together for warmth, lining up thoughts the way you line up supplies. Order soothes the mind when the world feels unpredictable. Stories begin to surface shared softly near the fire. Not grand tales, small ones, memories of home. A winter long ago that felt unbearable at the time, and now feels almost gentle by comparison. Voices stay low as if loud speech might disturb something fragile. Someone recites a passage they remember imperfectly. The words are out of order, but the rhythm is right. It does not matter if it is prayer poetry or something in between. The sound itself carries weight. You listen, letting it settle over you like another layer. You notice how routine and belief blend together at night. The act of checking a blanket becomes reassurance. The act of stirring embers becomes hope. Repetition steadies nerves as much as it preserves heat. You lie down and let the familiar motions guide you toward rest. Curl, tuck, breathe. The sequence feels almost meditative now. Your body responds more quickly, settling into a state that conserves energy without panic. At some point you realize fear has softened. It has not disappeared, but it no longer dominates. In its place is trust, not blind trust in safety, but trust in your ability to respond. That difference matters. The night passes with fewer interruptions. You wake briefly, check your surroundings, then sleep again. Each waking feels less urgent than before. You have learned when to respond and when to let be. Near dawn you notice the sky lightening without the usual tension. Morning feels expected rather than hoped for. That alone feels like progress. As light grows, the quiet rituals end naturally. People stretch. Someone rubs their eyes. Another exhales deeply as if releasing something held all night. The fire is coaxed back to life. The ordinary returns. You rise slowly, joints stiff but willing. The memory of whispered words and shared stories lingers. They did not change the temperature. They changed something else, something inside. You realize that survival is not only physical. It is also about giving the mind places to rest when the body cannot. Ritual belief and routine create those places quietly night after night. As you step into the pale morning, you feel steadier than you did days ago. The cold has not softened, but you have learned how to meet it with more than muscle and cloth. Another night has passed. Another layer of endurance added. And as the plains stretch out before you once more, you carry forward not just warmth, but the calm that comes from knowing you can face the dark and still find your way back to light. You notice the edges of the camp more carefully now, especially once the fire dims and the world beyond it thickens into shadow. Night does not erase the land, it reshapes it. Shapes move differently in the dark and your eyes learn new rules for seeing. The first sound comes low and distant, a drawn-out call that rises and falls. You freeze listening. It is answered from another direction, then another. The chorus spreads across the plains, stitching the darkness together with sound. Coyotes. You've heard them before, but never quite like this. The calls feel closer at night, even when they are not. Distance collapses in the cold air, carrying sound cleanly and far. You sit still, letting the noise pass through you instead of fighting it. Panic would only sharpen your imagination. You notice how the animals in camp respond. Horses lift their heads, ears swiveling. An ox stamps once, then settles again. Their calm steadies you. If they are not alarmed, you should not be either. Someone quietly adds fuel to the fire, not to make it bigger but brighter. Light matters now. It defines edges, breaks silhouettes, reminds the night that you are here. Shadows retreat slightly, gathering farther out. You think about how rarely wildlife actually approaches a settled camp. Noise fire and human scent create a boundary most animals respect. Still stories circulate, a wolf testing the edge, a curious shape slipping just beyond the light. Truth and exaggeration blur easily after dark. You lie down but keep your ears open. Sound becomes your primary sense. You learn to distinguish wind from movement, fabric from footfall. The difference matters. You catch yourself holding your breath to listen more clearly, then relax again. At some point you hear something closer. A rustle, a pause. Your muscles tense automatically. You sit up slightly, peering into the dark. The firelight flickers, revealing nothing but grass bending in the wind. You release the tension, slowly, embarrassed but relieved. You remind yourself that fear sharpens perception, but it also invents threats. Staying calm is a skill you're still learning. Tonight you practice. The night remains busy with sound. Wings beat overhead. Something scurries near the edge of camp, too small to worry about. The coyotes continue their conversation, rising and fading like waves. Eventually the noise blends into the background part of the night's texture rather than a warning. You think about how much awareness this requires. During the day, vision dominates. At night you listen your way through hours. It is tiring, but it keeps you alive. When you wake briefly before dawn, the sounds have changed. The calls are gone. The air feels quieter, heavier. Whatever passed through the night has moved on. You are still here. As light returns, you see tracks in the frost near the camp, small ones, nothing threatening. Still, they make the night feel real in a way memory cannot. You stand and stretch joints, stiff eyes gritty with sleep. The plains look calm again, almost gentle. It is hard to reconcile that with the sounds that filled the darkness hours ago. You pack up with a new respect for the unseen life around you. Night does not belong to you alone. You're a guest in it, tolerated, noticed, then ignored once you prove no trouble. Another night passed. Another lesson learned without words. You move on knowing that the dark is never empty, only quieter than you expect. There comes a night when rest and movement blur together, when staying still feels riskier than pressing on. You sense it before anyone says it aloud. The moon hangs low and bright, washing the plains in silver, and someone suggests travelling while the ground is firm and visible. The idea feels strange at first. Night has always meant shelter. Tonight it offers direction. You rise slowly, joints protesting, and begin preparing without hurry. Sound carries far under moonlight, so movements are careful, deliberate. Harnesses are checked by touch more than sight. Leather creaks softly. Breath fogs the air and drifts away. The sky feels closer when you move beneath it. Stars guide you in a way daylight never does, fixed and patient. You realize how easy it is to lose direction during the day, distracted by terrain and conversation. At night, the sky becomes the map. The wagons roll, slowly, wheels crunching faintly over frozen ground. The sound feels loud at first, then settles into a rhythm that matches your breathing. Cold air presses against your face, sharper now that movement stirs it. You pull fabric higher and lean into the pace. You notice how the moon changes depth. Shadows stretch long and flat, making small rises look larger than they are. You adjust your steps, trusting experience more than sight. Others do the same. The group moves like a single careful body. Travelling at night brings a different kind of warmth. Muscles engage. Blood moves. Cold retreats slightly, pushed back by motion. You feel it in your fingers first, then your toes. The relief is subtle, but real. You pause briefly when the wagons stop to rest animals. Steam rises from their flanks, catching moonlight and glowing softly. The sight feels almost unreal, like something imagined. You rest a hand against a warm hide and feel life pulsing steadily beneath it. When movement resumes, fatigue creeps in behind the warmth. You manage it carefully, keeping pace slow enough to last. Night travel is not about speed, it's about balance again and always. At some point, clouds drift across the moon, dimming the world. The change feels immediate. Shadows soften, depth flattens. You slow instinctively, listening more closely to the ground beneath your feet. Trust shifts from eyes to ears. You think about how rarely people imagine night as a time for progress. It feels like borrowed time, stolen from rest. Yet here you are, covering distance you could not manage comfortably during the day. The plains offer this gift sparingly. You take it without question. Eventually the group stops again. Not because you must, but because dawn is approaching. The eastern sky lightens almost imperceptibly, a thin band of grey pushing against black. You feel satisfaction settle in your chest. You have moved forward while the world slept. You make camp quickly, efficiently, as if the night taught you how. Bedding goes down. Fires are coaxed back to life. Movement slows. The warmth earned through motion fades gently rather than vanishing. You lie down with muscles pleasantly heavy, the kind of tired that invites sleep rather than fighting it. The ground feels less hostile now. Your body radiates heat from effort and insulation holds it better. As sleep takes you, you realize that navigation is not only about direction, it is about timing. Knowing when to rest, knowing when to move. Tonight you listened correctly. Morning will come soon enough. For now you let the last of the night carry you into rest, knowing you made progress when it mattered most. Cold sharpens tempers the way it sharpens breath. You feel it in yourself before you notice it in others. Small delays feel heavier. Quiet suggestions sound like criticism. By the time night settles again, patience has worn thin, in places you did not know it could wear at all. It begins with a simple disagreement. Where to place a wagon? Who should tend the fire first? Nothing that matters in daylight. In the cold, everything matters. Voices stay low, but edges creep in. Words are chosen faster with less care. You sit nearby, listening without meaning to. The argument circles the same point again and again, never quite landing. Both sides are tired, both are cold. Neither is wrong, but neither can yield easily. Yielding feels like losing ground, and ground feels precious out here. Someone finally steps away, muttering under their breath. The sound carries farther than intended. The air feels tight afterward, as if the cold itself is holding still to listen. No one moves for a moment. You notice how arguments change at night. During the day, people walk away. At night, space is limited. Fire, shelter, warmth pull everyone inward. Distance becomes a luxury you cannot afford, so tension lingers. You feel your own irritation flare when someone bumps into your bedding. It is accidental, harmless, but the reaction rises anyway. You catch it just in time, breathing through it slowly. You remind yourself that anger wastes heat as surely as panic does. The fire crackles too loud, then settles. Someone pokes it harder than necessary, sending sparks briefly upward. A sharp look follows. No words. Correction without confrontation. The message lands. You think about how quickly exhaustion turns into conflict. Sleep has been shallow for too long. Cold has stripped away buffers. What remains is raw and immediate. You recognize it because you feel it too. Someone offers food without comment. A piece of bread passed quietly. The gesture breaks the tension more effectively than words could. Chewing slows breathing. Warmth spreads. Anger loses momentum. You adjust your bedding and turn slightly away from the group, giving yourself a small pocket of mental space. You stare at the dark sky for a moment, letting perspective return. The stars feel distant, unconcerned. That helps. Nearby voices soften. The earlier argument is not resolved, but it has deflated. There will be daylight later for decisions. Night is not the time to settle disputes. Everyone knows this, even if no one says it aloud. You lie down and feel the cold creep in again, filling the space where tension once sat. You welcome it almost. Cold is simpler than conflict. It has no intention beyond itself. Sleep comes unevenly punctured by brief waking moments, where you check the fire, the wind, the people around you. Each time you settle a little faster. The edge dulls. Near dawn, you wake to quiet breathing and stillness. Whatever tension existed has been absorbed by fatigue. It will resurface later perhaps, or it will dissolve in daylight movement. Either way, it has lost its power for now. You sit up slowly as light begins to creep in, feeling the stiffness in your back, the ache in your shoulders. You also feel relief. Another night navigated without letting cold turn people against one another. You realize that surviving the plains is not only about managing weather and terrain, it is about managing yourself when comfort disappears, about choosing restraint when irritation feels justified, about letting the night pass without adding new wounds. As the day begins, you move forward again, carrying that lesson quietly. Cold will return, so will exhaustion. Next time you will recognize the signs sooner, and that recognition might be enough to keep the peace until morning. Some lessons arrive gently. Others come wrapped in loss, leaving marks that do not fade quickly. Night is often when those lessons settle deepest because there is nothing to distract from them. You feel the weight of it tonight before you understand why. The camp is quieter than usual. Movements are careful. Voices stay low without being asked. Something happened earlier in the journey, something no one wants to replay in detail. A mistake made in the cold, a choice rushed. The consequences linger, now carried forward into every decision. You notice how behaviour has changed. Blankets are checked twice. Fires are never left unattended. People drink warm liquids even when they do not feel thirsty. No one questions these habits anymore. Experience has sharpened them. You lie down and think about how quickly routines adjust after something goes wrong. What was optional becomes essential. What felt excessive becomes prudent. The night teaches efficiently when it has to. You remember a moment days ago when someone chose speed over care. A shortcut taken in fading light. The cold was underestimated. Now that memory shapes everything, it is not discussed openly, but it is present in the way people move. Sleep feels heavier tonight not because you are more tired, but because thought presses in. You replay moments wondering how easily outcomes could have shifted. The cold encourages this kind of thinking. It strips away noise, leaving only cause and effect. You hear someone stirring nearby, unable to rest. Their breathing is uneven, caught between sleep and wakefulness. Grief and regret do not keep schedules. They arrive when the world grows quiet enough to hear them. You remind yourself that the journey continues. Stopping does not undo what happened. The only response available is adaptation, learning without freezing in place. A fire burns steadily. No one feeds it carelessly. Each addition is measured. Sparks are watched. Warmth is protected with renewed seriousness. The night feels more deliberate now, less forgiving. You adjust your own habits in small ways. You double-check knots. You keep boots within reach. You eat a little more before settling. These choices feel heavier than before, anchored by memory. At some point you wake and realize you're warmer than you expected. Not because the night is kinder, but because mistakes have been corrected. That realization brings a quiet mix of relief and sadness. You think about how knowledge accumulates on this journey, not as information, but as behavior. The body remembers even when the mind resists. Loss becomes instruction. Near dawn the sky lightens slowly. You feel the familiar stiffness, the ache of another night endured. You also feel a steadier confidence. Painful lessons have narrowed the margin for error, but they have also sharpened awareness. As people rise, there is no ceremony, no speeches, just movement shaped by what has been learned. The camp functions more smoothly now, even in silence. You pack up with care, touching familiar items as if to reassure yourself they're still there. The road ahead remains uncertain. The cold will return. Mistakes will always be possible. But tonight taught you something that will not be forgotten. Survival is not just about preparation. It's about remembering, adjusting, and carrying lessons forward without letting them harden into fear. You move on with the others as morning takes hold. The plains stretch wide and indifferent as ever. Behind you, the night releases its grip. Ahead, the journey continues, shaped quietly by what the dark has already taken and what it has taught you to protect. The thaw does not arrive all at once. It creeps in quietly, almost politely during the day, then retreats again after sunset. These are the nights that confuse you the most. Cold no longer announces itself with brutality. Instead, it disguises itself as dampness, softness, false comfort. During daylight, snow slackens and sinks. Ice loosens its grip. The ground darkens and smells richer, heavier. You feel hope stirring as the sun warms your back, and for a few hours it almost feels earned. Then evening comes, and everything that melted begins to work against you. The ground beneath your feet turns slick and uneven. What was solid yesterday now shifts slightly under weight. Mud clings to boots, adding heft with every step. You scrape it off where you can. knowing that carrying it into night means carrying moisture with you. As darkness settles, the temperature drops again, not sharply but enough. The dampness left behind by the day freezes slowly, quietly. You hear it before you see it. A faint crackle beneath the grass, a stiffening of fabric. Moisture turns treacherous the moment it changes state. You lay out your bedding, carefully choosing higher ground where water has not pooled. Experience has taught you to read the earth. Low spots gleam faintly in starlight, reflecting just enough to warn you away. You avoid them instinctively now. The air feels heavier tonight. Not colder exactly, just thicker. It presses in around your lungs. You notice how breath fogs more densely, hanging close, before drifting away. You adjust how you breathe slower, deeper, warming air before it enters. Someone nearby wrings out a piece of cloth with bare hands, the sound wet and unpleasant. You wince in sympathy. Wet fabric at night is unforgiving. It stiffens quickly, turning from pliable to sharp in minutes. You make a mental note to check your own layers again. The fire struggles differently on nights like this. Damp fuel hisses and smokes before it catches. Flames appear briefly, then falter. Smoke hugs the ground, refusing to rise. Eyes sting. Throats tighten. You tend the fire, patiently coaxing rather than forcing it. There is a temptation to overdress tonight. The cold does not feel severe, so you pile on layers without thinking. Then movement warms you just enough to sweat, and you feel it immediately. The moisture creeps along your skin, subtle and dangerous. You pause, loosen a layer, let heat escape before it traps itself. You realize that spring nights demand more attention than winter ones. Winter is honest, it shows its teeth. Spring pretends. It lures you into carelessness, then punishes it slowly. Sleep is restless. The ground beneath you refreezes unevenly, creating new pressure points. You shift more often than usual, never settling completely. Each movement risks pressing damp fabric against skin. You grow still again, accepting discomfort over risk. You wake briefly to the sound of dripping. Somewhere meltwater has found a path. The sound is soft, irregular, maddening. You adjust your bedding again, inching away from the noise, choosing dryness over convenience. Your hands ache tonight in a different way. Not numb, sore. The kind of ache that comes from repeated exposure to wet cold. You flex your fingers slowly, feeling stiffness resist, then ease. Sensation returns unevenly, reminding you to keep moving just enough. The night carries more smells now. Wet earth, rotting grass, smoke clinging low. The plains feel alive in a way they did not during deep freeze. Life stirs under the thaw, and that movement carries its own challenges. You think about how many journeys falter during transitions rather than extremes. It is easy to prepare for obvious danger. It's harder to stay alert when conditions appear to improve. You remind yourself not to relax too soon. Near dawn, the temperature dips again, sealing the night's dampness into frost. Everything stiffens. Boots left outside freeze solid. You knock ice from them gently before putting them on, careful not to crack leather already stressed. As light returns, the world looks deceptively clean. Frost sparkles over yesterday's mud, hiding the mess beneath. You know better now. You step carefully, aware that softness will return with the sun. You stretch slowly, joints stiff but cooperative. The night did not break you, but it demanded attention every step of the way. You feel more tired than after colder nights, drained by constant adjustment. As you pack, you separate damp items from dry, prioritizing what must be protected. You hang what you can, even briefly letting morning air do some work. Every small effort matters. The thaw will continue. So will the cold. Nights like this will repeat, each slightly different, each requiring patience. You accept that survival is not about reaching an endpoint. It is about navigating transitions without letting your guard down. You shoulder your load and move on, boots squelching softly at first, then crunching as frost gives way. The plains shift beneath you, neither winter nor spring fully, and you adjust with them, carrying forward the quiet knowledge that the most dangerous nights are often the ones that pretend to be gentle. Night stretches differently when stories begin to circulate. The cold is still there, pressing at the edges of camp, but it no longer fills every corner of your awareness. Words do that instead. They build small rooms inside the dark where the mind can rest. Someone begins without ceremony, speaking softly so the sound does not travel too far. It is not a grand tale, just a memory. A winter back home that felt endless. A night spent listening to ice crack on a pond. The details come slowly, shaped by pauses rather than excitement. You listen without interrupting, letting the rhythm settle you. The firelight flickers across faces, turning expressions gentle and indistinct. Stories do that. They blur sharp lines. They slow breathing. They remind you that time can be measured in more than hours of cold. Others add their own fragments. A childhood prank. A familiar road. A voice remembered but no longer heard. None of it is heroic. All of it matters. These pieces stitch people together in a way the day never quite manages. You notice how bodies relax as the stories unfold. Shoulders drop. Hands loosen their grip on blankets. Even the cold seems to recede, slightly pushed back by attention turned inward. Warmth moves through the group in a way no fire can match. Someone laughs quietly at a remembered mistake. The sound is brief, almost surprised, but it lingers. Laughter feels risky at night, as if it might draw the dark closer. Still, no harm comes. The plains do not respond. They listen indifferent. You feel yourself drifting not into sleep yet, but into a softer state. The stories blur at the edges, voices overlapping, details fading. You stop tracking who is speaking and simply absorb the sound. A tale begins about a journey that went wrong and somehow ended right anyway. The details are fuzzy. Perhaps they always were. What matters is the reassurance threaded through it. Others have been cold before. Others have endured nights like this and kept going. You realize storytelling here is not entertainment. It is regulation. It keeps fear from growing too large. It gives shape to long hours that might otherwise stretch uncomfortably. It reminds the mind that it belongs somewhere warmer than the present moment. The fire burns low, but no one rushes to feed it. The stories are enough for now. Embers glow steadily, reflecting in tired eyes. Someone pokes the fire once gently, then returns to listening. As the night deepens, the stories slow. Sentences grow longer. Pauses stretch. Voices trail off and are not picked up again. Sleep edges closer, invited by familiarity and repetition. You shift slightly, careful not to disturb the quiet. The ground feels less hostile when your thoughts are elsewhere. Cold becomes background rather than focus. You breathe more deeply, letting the rhythm of voices guide you downward. Eventually the last story fades into silence. No one marks the ending. It simply happens. The night resumes its usual sounds. Wind, fabric, breath. But something has changed. The darkness feels less empty. You lie back fully now, eyes closed, the memory of words lingering like a low hum. They do not resolve into images anymore. They dissolve into feeling, connection, continuity. Near dawn, you wake briefly and realize the night passed more easily than most. Not because it was warmer, but because it was shared. You stretch slowly, feeling stiffness return, but without the edge of dread. As light begins to creep in, you hear someone stirring, preparing to rise. The stories are not mentioned again. They do not need to be. Their work is already done. You sit up and look around the camp. Faces look tired but steady. The cold did its work, so did the words. Both shaped the night in different ways. You pack up quietly, carrying the sense that survival is not only about enduring discomfort, it is about finding ways to make long nights feel shorter, about letting memory and imagination create shelter where none exists. As you move on with the others, the plains open ahead once more. Another night waits somewhere down the road. When it comes, you know you will meet it with more than layers and fire. You will meet it with stories ready to soften the dark until morning arrives. The nights begin to change in small, almost polite ways. You notice it first in the air, which no longer bites quite as sharply when the sun slips away. Cold still arrives, but it feels less personal now, less determined. You breathe it in and recognize the shift without celebrating it. These are the last nights on the open plains, though no one marks them as such. There is no announcement, no sense of arrival yet. The land still stretches wide, but something ahead promises difference. Trees appear more often. The horizon feels less endless. Shelter begins to feel imaginable again. You settle into camp with a confidence earned rather than assumed. Movements are smooth, decisions come quickly. You know where to place your bedding without thinking. You know which layers to wear and which to keep dry. The cold still matters, but it no longer surprises you. As darkness deepens, you feel a strange mix of relief and caution. Easier nights can be dangerous too. Comfort invites inattention. You remind yourself not to loosen habits that kept you alive. Routine remains your anchor. The fire burns steadily, not large, not small, just enough. You warm your hands briefly, then pull back. The urge to linger has faded. You have learned that warmth does not need to be chased constantly. It needs to be managed. You lie down and listen. The night sounds feel familiar now. Wind through grass, a distant call, the soft movements of people settling nearby. Nothing feels new. That familiarity brings calm. Sleep comes more easily, not deeply but gently. You wake less often. When you do, you adjust without irritation. The cold feels manageable, like something you know how to negotiate with. You think about the nights behind you, the first shock of cold, the endless adjustments, the mistakes, the quiet victories. Each one taught you something your body will remember long after this journey ends. Near dawn you wake and sense the day arriving without tension. Light creeps in softly. Frost still clings to surfaces, but it melts faster now. You stretch slowly, feeling stiffness ease more quickly than before. As you rise, you realize something has shifted inside you. You're no longer measuring survival in hours. You're measuring it in continuity. One night flows into the next without breaking you. That feels like progress. You pack with a steady rhythm, not rushed, not hesitant. The plains have not defeated you. They have instructed you. You carry that instruction forward. As the sun climbs, the cold loosens its grip once more. You step into the day with quiet confidence, knowing that even if colder nights return, you know how to meet them now. You move on, leaving behind the open vastness that taught you how to endure darkness without walls. The plains recede slowly, not erased but folded into memory. And as the day unfolds, the last cold night fades into something gentler, not forgotten, integrated. Now the pace slows. Your breathing softens. The journey settles into the background like a story already told. You remember the firelight, the shared warmth, the listening, the patience. You remember how the cold taught you to be attentive, careful, and calm. You let those memories drift without effort. The night no longer presses close. It recedes. Your body rests. Your mind loosens. The plains stretch out one final time, wide and quiet, then dissolve into darkness that no longer threatens. You are warm enough. You are safe enough. You have done enough. And as sleep finally deepens, the long journey quiets completely, leaving only the steady rhythm of breath and the comfort of knowing that even the coldest nights can be survived one gentle moment at a time. The night settles now in a quieter way, no longer pressing itself against you, no longer asking anything in return. Your body understands this before your thoughts do. Breathing slows. Muscles release their careful tension. The plains which once felt so vast and watchful begin to soften at the edges, fading into something distant and calm. You let your attention drift away from survival and toward rest. The sounds that once demanded listening now blur into a gentle background. Wind becomes a low hush. Fabric no longer snaps its sighs. Even the cold feels less like an adversary and more like a memory, something that has already done its work and moved on. Your thoughts loosen their grip on sequence and detail. The journey no longer feels like a series of nights to endure, but like a long breath finally exhaled. You're no longer counting layers or checking for drafts or listening for danger. You're simply here wrapped in stillness held by the quiet you worked so hard to earn. Images float gently through your mind, firelight glowing low, stars stretched wide above dark grass, the steady presence of others nearby breathing, resting, surviving alongside you. These memories arrive without urgency and drift away just as easily, leaving behind a sense of warmth that has nothing to do with temperature. Your eyelids grow heavy now, comfortably so. There's no need to follow the road any farther tonight. No need to prepare for what comes next. The plains recede, completely dissolving into a soft, featureless dark that feels safe and familiar. You rest. Your breathing evens out. The world grows quieter still, and as sleep finally takes you, the long, cold journey fades into silence, leaving you warm enough, calm enough, and gently carried into the night. Sweet dreams!